Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The train wheezed to a stop beneath a veil of fog, its brakes shrieking like something trying not to be caught. Maren Holloway stepped onto the wet platform of Wake Hollow, her boots pressing into damp moss between the planks. The town hadn't changed. Same narrow-eyed station master, same rust-colored trees leaning like voyeurs toward the tracks, same iron silence that seemed to clamp down over the forest when no one was speaking. She paused and adjusted the strap on her shoulder. The canvas bag was heavier than it should have been, mostly archival notebooks, a recorder and 2 laptops, but it wasn't the weight that strained her spine. It was being back. The fog curled around her knees as she moved toward the lone taxi that idled beyond the platform. The driver was asleep, or pretending. She tapped on the glass. "You Holloway?" he grunted, not looking at her. "Yes, Maren," he grunted again, this time less like a man and more like something old groaning in its roots. The ride into town was quiet. She stared out the window as the forest swallowed the road. Pines like blackened fingers, deer skulls nailed to fence, posts untouched by moss or time. Not decorations, not warnings, just there. It had been 21 years since she left Wake Hollow. They didn't speak until he dropped her at the tiny stone library where she'd be working. "You sure you're staying alone in there?" he asked. "It's just a library. Used to be the town hall, back before the hollow cracked." She turned to ask what he meant, but he'd already driven off, tailpipe coughing into the fog. Maren unlocked the door. The metal creaked with that intimate sound only truly old buildings have, a slow, resentful sigh. The interior smelled of wet paper, pine resin, and something sour tucked in the wood. Dust swam in the narrow shafts of grey light through stained glass windows depicting animals in unnatural poses, a fox devouring itself, a crow eating its own eyes, a stag crowned in thorns. The archive was in the basement. It took her 10 minutes to find the hidden latch behind a bookshelf. Aggie had given her instructions over the phone with the maddening pace of someone trying not to say too much. The old librarian was somewhere in town, but hadn't been well enough to meet in person yet. "Everything you need," she'd rasped, "is waiting where the blood dries slowest." Cryptic old bat. The latch groaned open, revealing a narrow stairwell that reeked of mildew and something deeper, like bone left under snow too long. Maren descended, her fingers brushing the stone wall for balance. At the bottom, she unlocked the barred wooden door with the iron key from her envelope. Inside, shelves of brittle county records, stacked wooden crates of cassette tapes, brittle journals wrapped in twine, and cardboard boxes labeled redacted. The first hour she spent cataloguing the oldest entries, property deeds from the 1700s, letters from trappers detailing horned wretches in the wood, medical reports with entire pages blacked out. But then she found the book. It was a children's book, faded and warped by moisture. The thicket prints, illustrated in crude, scratchy ink. She hadn't seen it in decades, but every line of its cover vibrated inside her like déjà vu. A stag standing upright, his eyes hollow and black. A girl holding a splintered antler like a wand. Her own name, Maren, written in careful child's script on the inside cover. Heart hammering, she flipped to the back. The final page had been cut out, replaced with a brittle slip of wax paper folded 3 times. Inside it, wrapped like a relic, was a splintered piece of antler about the length of her finger. The tip was broken but sharp, yellowed at the edges with a single rust-brown smear that hadn't faded with time. Her hands began to shake. It wasn't possible. This was the book she'd been reading the day Ellis vanished. She hadn't remembered that until now, not clearly. Just fragments, the sound of wind like breathing through hollow bone. His scream, maybe. The snap of a branch. Her knees soaked in blood that wasn't hers. Or was it? She sat on the floor, cradling the antler in her palm. It was light, almost fragile, but cold. Her thumb ran the ridge of it until a jolt of pain stabbed her wrist, as if something inside the object recoiled from her touch. From upstairs, something shifted. It wasn't loud, just a soft scuff, like someone moving across the wooden floor in woolen socks. She froze. The door at the top of the stairs creaked. Not open, just moved. She held her breath. The old pipes. A raccoon. Wind. But the building was sealed. She had checked every door, every lock. Maren, a voice whispered from the stairwell. She stood, heart in her throat, ears ringing. The voice was wrong, hollow. Like it had been spoken through a field recorder left out in the snow for years, the splintered antler fell from her hand and struck the stone floor. Clack, clack, like hooves. She backed away. The stairwell stood empty. Then, the door above groaned open and light flooded the stairs, long and red like the hour before slaughter. But no one stood there, only the soft sound of antlers scraping wood. The morning light in Wake Hollow had a strange weight to it, as if it passed through layers of silence before touching the skin. Maren stepped outside the library just after dawn, the splintered antler wrapped tightly in a silk scarf and tucked into her coat pocket like a forgotten relic. It hadn't stopped pulsing all night, not physically, of course. It just felt like it wanted to be held or buried. She hadn't slept. Every time her eyes closed, she heard the same sound, a rustle in the pine needles and the faint metallic ring of antlers colliding somewhere far, far off. The air smelled like damp moss and slow decay. Frost webbed the corners of the street signs, and the town was still, too still, as if every house on Main Street were just a facade stretched over something. Watching from behind, Maren followed the path that looped behind the post office to the ranger station. The forest loomed behind it like a forgotten god, unmoving but always listening. Inside, a wood-burning stove hissed in the corner. Conrad Mears stood near a shelf of worn field guides, adjusting the strap on his rifle holster. He was younger than she remembered, though they were roughly the same age. Broad-shouldered, unshaven, with eyes like bruised snow, cold, soft, and full of something buried too deep to name. "You're early," he said without turning. "So are you." "I'm always early when the fog moves backward." Maren paused. "What does that mean?" He looked at her. Not through her, but around her, as if tracking the outline of something that walked beside her. "You said you needed to photograph the boundary markers near the North Ridge," he said. "I did. Some of the records are mismatched. Land disputes from the original settlement don't line up with the modern map. Could be useful. Or dangerous." She frowned. "It's public land." He pulled on a forest green coat, zipped it to the throat. "It's old land. That's different." They stepped outside together. The trailhead began just past the cemetery, where the trees thickened and the town thinned like an old memory. Dead leaves hung limp in the branches, some still tinged crimson, as if nature had forgotten to finish the transition. The climb was slow and silent. The only sounds were their boots crunching frost-laced pine needles and the occasional click of her camera. She didn't speak until they passed the third marker, a bent iron post wrapped in brittle, almost translucent vines. "You grew up here, right?" she asked. Conrad nodded. "Then maybe you knew my brother, Ellis Holloway." He hesitated just slightly. "I remember him," he said. "You two were inseparable until he disappeared." Maren swallowed. "Do you remember what happened?" "No one really talks about it," Conrad said, scanning the tree line. "Your dad said it was an animal attack, But the way I remember it, nobody found much of anything, just some tracks and... He stopped. And what? Blood, he finished. But not enough for a body. Maren's fingers tensed around the strap of her camera. I don't remember it clearly, just pieces. I was told it was an accident. You were found near the edge of the West Hollow, barefoot, covered in mud. Kept saying something about a crown of teeth. He looked at her now, his gaze level and unsettling. You really don't remember? No. She exhaled. And I think something wants me to. They walked a little farther before he spoke again. Do you hear it sometimes? He asked. She stopped. Hear what? The clatter. A single breath escaped her throat. At night. He nodded. It happens every October, right around the rut. Deer start moving strange. Herds shift like they're running from something older than instinct. Sometimes people hear antlers, even when there's nothing near. And the locals? They don't talk about it. Some leave town for a few weeks every fall. Some stay drunk. Some pretend it's wind through the ridge. She didn't ask what he did. They reached a clearing that overlooked the northern slope. It dipped into a hollow, black and pulsing with trees. From here, Maren could see a deer carcass half submerged in the mud at the bottom of the hill. At one first glance, it looked like it had been attacked by wolves, but the antlers were twisted, not snapped. Bent into the shape of a spiral, not natural. She pulled out her camera and zoomed in. The lens focused, and then shifted. For half a second, the deer's eyes looked up through the frame. She flinched and dropped the camera. Conrad didn't react. He was kneeling near a tree, tracing the bark with his glove. Something scraped this last night. He stepped aside and pointed. A pair of long, parallel grooves dragged vertically down the trunk. Not claw marks, not knife marks. Something else. Something wide and curved with multiple points, like a crown. Can I show you something? She asked. He nodded. She reached into her coat pocket and slowly unwrapped the scarf. The splintered antler glinted pale and yellow in the morning light. Conrad stared at it for a long moment. His jaw twitched. Where did you find that? In a book. A children's book from the archive. One I read the day Ellis went missing. He stepped back. You should burn it. It was mine. It's connected to that day. It wants you to remember, he said, eyes darkening. It always starts that way. Objects, dreams. Then the forest starts making room for you again. What do you mean again? Conrad looked at her, then at the trees. The air had thickened. Nothing in Wake Hollow ever forgets, he said. A branch snapped in the woods behind them. Maren turned. Nothing there, only the faint breeze. Only the smell of rotting fir. But under it all, the sound of something tapping against bark, like bone, like horn. The rain had turned thin by the time Maren returned to the library, but it wasn't gentle. It came down in invisible threads, slicking the cobblestones with a glimmering sheen and sliding across the windows like something trying to get in. The fog had thickened, curling down the streets like slow smoke. Nothing moved, no cars, no footsteps. Just the distant sound of crows arguing above the chapel roof. Maren stood in front of the library door, her hand frozen on the knob. There was an urge, not fear exactly, but a sharp, internal tug that told her not to go back inside, as if something had shifted in her absence. She breathed once deeply. The splintered antler pulsed against her chest beneath her sweater, wrapped tight in its scarf. Warm now, warmer than it had any right to be. She stepped inside. The door shut behind her without sound. The library was colder than before. The old radiator groaned softly like it had taken a wound to the lungs, and the shadows in the stained glass reflections had grown longer than the actual hour. Books on the shelves all leaned slightly left, as if bowing to something unseen. At the front desk, a parcel waited, wrapped in thick brown paper, sealed with red wax that had run in rivulets down the sides. Her name was written on the front in faint pencil. Maren Holloway, no return address, no stamp. She opened it carefully. Inside, nestled between yellowed tissue paper and the faint scent of dried herbs, was an iron key and a small note in cramped handwriting. Beneath the settler records, third cabinet, drawer marked V null. Aggie, she stared at the key, turning it slowly between her fingers. Old, worn, blackened with time, drawer V null. The phrase meant nothing to her. Null entries were a common archival term, documents that had been invalidated or deemed irrelevant to an official record, but she'd never seen one physically marked that way. It was a kind of redaction, a disappearance. She descended to the basement again. The door creaked less this time, as if the building had accepted her return. The archive smelled different now, not just old paper and mildew, something sweeter. Not pleasant, more like dried blood hidden beneath honeysuckle. Maren ran her hand along the wooden cabinets until she found the third in the settler series. Carved on the bottom drawer, barely visible in the flicker of the old bulb, was a hand-carved sigil, a crude V, with a slash through it, surrounded by notches like deer tracks. Her fingers hesitated on the iron lock. The key slid in with a shudder and clicked. Inside the drawer were a dozen files, each wrapped in black linen, each tagged with initials she didn't recognize. But tucked between them was a flat wooden box, unmarked. No hinges, no label. It felt warm to the touch, like it had been sitting in sunlight. She opened it slowly. Inside, a cassette tape, black, scorched at the edges. Written on the label in old red ink, "No one leaves the hollow." Her skin crawled. She stared at the tape, trying to breathe. There were dozens of playback machines on the shelf nearby, cassette recorders, old reel-to-reel devices, even a battered digital converter. She selected a dusty portable player and popped the tape in, hands trembling. For a moment, only static. Then something crackled through. Wind, not natural wind. This was deeper, throaty, like someone exhaling through hollow bone. Then came the clatter. First, soft, then layered. Like dozens of objects, wood, bone, horn, colliding at intervals, not random, rhythmic. Then a voice, not screaming, not speaking, chanting words she couldn't place. Old syllables, vowel heavy, drawn out, choked by emotion or ritual. Then came a new sound, hooves on stone, then silence. Then Maren, a whisper. On the tape, sharp, almost behind her. She stopped the player immediately. The voice had been her name, not a coincidence, not a trick of the ear, spoken by someone who knew her. Knew now. She backed away from the table. Behind her, something shifted. Slow drag across stone, like something heavy being pulled just out of sight. The overhead light flickered, and then, without her touching it, the cassette player hit play again. She turned. Too late. The clattering filled the archive again, louder now. The voice returned. This time it wasn't chanting. It was laughing, low, wet, like something with a mouth too wide. She lunged for the stop button, but the tape whirred faster, spinning wildly, the magnetic strip peeling from the reel like dead skin, and then clack, 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 antlers, close, just beyond the shelves. She turned, and all the shadows bent toward her. The light exploded, the room went black, and from somewhere, in the dark, something scraped the wall. A high, chitinous sound like antlers dragging through stone. Maren stood frozen, one hand on the table, the other clutching her coat pocket. Her phone flicked on by accident in her bag. Blinding white light. It lit the floor just enough. There, on the tile, hoof prints, not shoe prints, not boots. Hooves, split, deep, leading to the stairwell, and beside them, her own footprints. Not recent, not from today, from before. She hadn't been down here yet, when those prints were made. Had she? She moved slowly to the light switch, clicked it. The bulb sputtered. Then came back on, dim, buzzing. The archive looked normal again. The hoofprints were gone. The player was gone. The tape, still on the table. But the label had changed. The red ink bled slightly now, letters warped. What had once said, "No one leaves." The hollow now read, "No one left," and below it scratched faintly with something sharp, "Give it back." Maren touched the pocket with the antler. It was hot now, pulsing, thirsty. Maren didn't leave the library for hours. She sat in the upstairs reading room with every light on, coat zipped to her throat, hands trembling over a cup of weak coffee. Outside, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. The fog remained, a thick, sagging veil between the world she remembered and the one slowly emerging beneath it. She hadn't slept. Again. Not because she didn't want to, but because sleep now felt like a door she couldn't control. And something behind that door was waiting to step through if she let it. The cassette still sat on the desk across the room. She hadn't touched it again. The tape's new message, "No one left," still burned in her memory, but not more than the carved words below it. Give it back. It had to be referring to the antler. But how could she give back something she hadn't? Taken, or had she? Maren needed air, not freedom, just space. She slipped out into the street, hood pulled low, scarf pulled tighter, the antler still bound and warm in her pocket. It had cooled slightly since the night before. Not calm, dormant, like something biding its time. The town didn't move. Shutters stayed latched, curtains drawn. The few cars on the street had fogged over windshields and tires stained with moss, as though no one had used them in weeks. She passed 3 mailboxes whose mouths were stuffed with damp letters that no one had retrieved. The silence was only broken by the wind, and even that sounded rehearsed. Her feet took her toward the cafe. A place called the Hollow Spoon, though the rusted sign above the door now read the Howl Spoon, the L half faded and dripping rust like old blood. The smell of coffee wafted out through the vents, a mix of burnt hazelnut and wet flannel, and the bell above the door gave a strangled jingle as she stepped inside. Warmth, light, a radio playing softly in the corner, something old maybe, a local AM station. A waitress she didn't recognize gave her a thin smile and gestured to sit anywhere. Maren took a table by the window. For a few minutes, she simply sat, breathed, sipped the coffee when it came, scalding, bitter, under-extracted, but real. A small mirror hung beside the napkin dispenser, angled strangely, as if placed to observe the cafe's interior from a side glance rather than off a reflection. She glanced into it once, only once, and her entire body locked still. Saw the reflection. She wasn't alone. A child sat across from her. A boy. Mud-caked skin. Hollow eyes. Blood up to his elbows. Ellis, her twin. He was looking at her. Maren flinched and turned, knocking over the coffee cup. The seat across from her was empty, just steam curling up from the spilled drink. She looked, back at the mirror. It now showed nothing but her own face, wide-eyed, pale, lips parted like a scream had been stolen halfway up her throat. Her breath fogged the glass slightly. But not in the mirror, only in real life. The reflected version of her mouth was moving, speaking, but her actual lips were still. She couldn't make out what was being said. The sound was muffled, as if underwater. But her mirror self leaned, closer, eyes darkening, and whispered something, a single word, remember. Maren bolted from the cafe. Outside, the air had thickened again, syrupy and grey. She staggered down the sidewalk, past the old barber shop with the boarded windows, past the gas station that no longer had pumps, past the alley where a taxidermy shop had once displayed a dozen antlered heads in its window, and stopped. She turned slowly. The taxidermy shop was gone, replaced with black glass. Not broken, not stained, just a wall of obsidian mirror, as if the town itself had swallowed the building in silence. She stepped closer, and there behind the glass, not her reflection, but something waiting. A stag-headed figure. Its antlers were twisted, too many points, like a crown made from torn trees and broken memory. Its body human in shape but not in motion. Shoulders dislocated, joints wrong, limbs too long, and in its hand it held the same splintered antler she had found in the archive. But it was whole now. Clean. Bloodless. It held it up slowly, tapped the glass. Clack. Then pointed at her chest, her coat pocket, where the real one pulsed faintly. Warm again. She stumbled backward and blinked. The window reflected only her own shape now, alone, no figure, no gesture, no antler. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. She turned sharply. Cass Whitlock. Early 30s, tall, dressed in too many layers for the mild October air. Headphones around his neck, field recorder in one hand. His eyes were the wrong kind of excited, somewhere between discovery and obsession. "I didn't think you were real," he said, smiling. "What?" "Been asking around. Locals said Maren Holloway wasn't here. Said she was dead. Or should be." Maren's heart thudded once, like her blood tried to stop moving. "Who are you?" "Cass. I run a podcast. Dead Ground. Investigate folklore, vanishing towns, buried crimes. Wake Hollow came up when I was researching your brother." "Ellis?" Cass nodded. "I've found 6 disappearances in the last 30 years. All during the rut, all in or near the forest, all kids, all twins." She went pale. "There's something wrong with this place," Cass said. "I've been here 2 days, and I already found a field recording of something that wasn't human. It sounds like antlers scraping against teeth." Maren's breath caught. "I found a recording too," she said. Cass's eyebrows lifted. "What was on it?" "A voice," she whispered. "Mine, and something else, something chanting." Cass leaned in. "Can I hear it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, as if recognizing something broken behind her eyes. "Okay, but just know this. Wake Hollow doesn't keep records. It keeps scars. You don't find truth here. It finds you." He turned and walked into the mist, footsteps vanishing before sound could catch up. Maren stood still for a long time, then slowly turned back to the black window. There, for just a second, her reflection blinked, but she did not. The sky over Wake Hollow collapsed into night with no ceremony. One moment the fog carried the gold-grey haze of dusk. The next, the trees vanished into shadow, and the street lamps began flickering like faint stars dying behind a veil of rain. Maren stood at the edge of the library's gravel path, watching the clouds churn. Not fast, not violently, but deliberately, like something shifting in its sleep. She hadn't moved since returning from town. Her boots were soaked, her fingers numb. The antler in her pocket still radiated that low, aching warmth. No longer. Pulsing but settled, like it had made peace with her body, or maybe just grown comfortable there. She finally turned and entered the library. Upstairs, the lights remained on, buzzing faintly. The faintest sound of paper shifting reached her ears from the west wing. But when she checked, no one was there. Only the cold glass of the windows. Only the rows of books with broken spines. She locked the doors, checked them twice, drew the heavy curtains. The cassette remained untouched on the upstairs table, but something about it had changed. Its black surface now faintly marred by a fine ring of white mold, as if time had passed around it faster than it should have. She didn't touch it. Instead, she climbed the narrow staircase to the old librarian's loft above the west wing, where Aggie had said she could sleep. The room was barely furnished. A bed frame bolted into the wall, a wooden desk with a cracked oil lamp, and a floor made of uneven planks that creaked in unfamiliar rhythms. The ceiling sloped, low enough that she had to crouch in places. Only one window, narrow and fog-streaked, looked out into the pine wood behind the building. She removed her coat, unwrapped the antler from its scarf. For the first time, she set it on the desk. Not reverently, but carefully, like placing down a thing that might wake if mishandled. She stared at it, splintered, jagged at the edge. The bloodstain faded now into the marrow. A groove she hadn't noticed before, etched just beneath the tip, ran along the curve of it. Not a natural mark, a carving. She leaned in. The groove formed a pattern, not a symbol but letters, etched faintly, almost hidden. 3 characters. A, H, H. Her heart stuttered. Aggie. Her initials. But what would... The sound came suddenly, a sharp snap from the woods, then another, then silence. Maren leaned toward the window. The fog had thinned, revealing the first few lines of trees, tall, skeletal. Behind them, more fog, deeper now, swelling like lungs. Then, she saw it. A shape, just past the first row of trees. A deer. No, too large. Its antlers tangled in the branches above its head, not moving. Its body still. The kind of stillness not born of peace, but of hunger holding its breath. She blinked. It was gone. She didn't remember lying down, only closing her eyes for a moment, only listening to the faint buzz of the lamp as her thoughts softened. And then, the dream. She stood in a forest. The trees curved inward like a rib cage. No leaves, just bone-white bark slick with breath. The air didn't move. Fog coiled at her ankles, soft as milk. Something moved ahead, crunching slowly. Through the fog, Maren walked toward it. The trees grew denser. Their trunks cracked and twitched as she passed. One had a deer's eye embedded in the bark. Another had a mouth, human-shaped, murmuring her name over and over in a child's voice, Maren. Maren. She kept walking. Ahead, a clearing, in the center, a pool of blood, still and perfect, reflecting the sky. But there was no sky. Only darkness. Only the upside-down reflection of antlers, branching endlessly, and there, kneeling at the water's edge, Ellis, her brother, older now, pale, shirtless, scars across his chest in the shape of hoof prints. He held something in his hand, extended it toward her. It was the splintered antler, but now it was whole and covered in moss, tangled with hair. When she took it, he looked up, and his face wasn't his face. It was hollow, a skull. Antlers growing from it like roots splitting a coffin. Give it back, he said, voice distorted, like played through decades of decay. Maren tried to speak, but her mouth was sewn shut. She looked down at the antler. It was melting in her hand, becoming bone, becoming wood, becoming teeth, it hissed. You wore the crown first. The trees screamed. From the edges of the clearing, a dozen deer appeared, walking upright, their hooves clicking on stone, eyes black, necks snapped sideways. Each held an antler in their hand. Each bled from their mouths. One pointed at her. You don't remember, it said. Another. You never wanted to. Then Ellis again. You left me for it. She stumbled backward, into the blood pool. It swallowed her. She fell into the sky reflected below, tumbling through clouds made of fur and screams, a final voice, right in her ear. Wake up, Maren, she gasped, bolted upright. The room was dark. Now, The lamp had burned out. The window rattled slightly in the wind. She sat still, heart jackhammering. Had it just been a dream? Then her eyes adjusted, and she screamed. The splintered antler was gone. In its place, a small pile of dirt and pine needles laid neatly on the desk. Inside it, barely visible, a tiny hoof print pressed into the wood, fresh, still wet. Maren didn't speak for an hour. She sat at the edge of the bed in the loft, the cold from the floorboards seeping into her bones, her breath shallow, eyes locked on the tiny hoof print on the desk. The pine needles had scattered when she screamed, but the print remained, indented perfectly into the wood, no larger than a child's thumbprint, slick with something that looked like sap but smelled metallic. She hadn't moved the dirt. She hadn't dared. The antler was gone. She had searched the entire loft, her hands trembling, eyes flicking over shadows with suspicion. Beneath the bed, inside the drawer, behind the cracked mirror, nothing. It had vanished, replaced by a mark, a calling card, or a warning when the first light crept through the window, grey, thin, reluctant. She rose slowly, washed her face with cold water from the tin basin, and made her way down to the main floor. The library was still. Dust hovered in the slants of morning light, like disturbed ash. No one had entered during the night. The front door was still latched, the chain still drawn. She tried to tell herself the dream had been just that. A dream. But when she looked down at the desk once more, the hoofprint was still there. Still wet. She made her way back to the archive. Something drove her there. Something heavier than instinct. A pressure behind her eyes, like memory trying to claw its way out. The scent of old paper wrapped around her as she descended the stairs. A shiver passed through her, not from cold but from recognition. She was no longer just cataloguing the town's secrets. She was inside them now. The drawer-marked V-null was still open from 2 nights before. The scorched cassette lay untouched, though its label seemed darker now, almost smeared. She ignored it. Instead, she pulled out the stack of settler maps stored above the drawer. Most were brittle, yellowed. Some detailed terrain that no longer existed. Hills where valleys now ran, lakes long drained. But one caught her eye. Thicker paper drawn in red ink, partially torn but still legible. It had a strange smell, earthy and sharp. When she unfolded it across the table, she froze. A large bloodstain spread across the center, soaked deep into the fibers. It wasn't recent. It had dried, oxidized, and darkened into a rust-colored blotch. But it was unmistakable. Maren's fingers traced the lines around it. The map was a topographic sketch of Wake Hollow circa 1995, the year Ellis vanished. Her heart caught when she saw it. A tiny handwritten note in the corner, in familiar handwriting. Childish, yet careful. E.H. Deer path here. Ellis Holloway. Her brother. She leaned closer. The path he'd marked ran between 2 slopes behind the West Hollow, an area the modern map labelled as unfit for development due to soil instability. But this old map showed a thin trail winding through, labelled only with a symbol, 3 slashes, and a dot. She flipped the map over. Nothing on the back. Why would Ellis have marked this? How did it get archived? The edges of the paper tingled beneath her fingertips. Some part of her, a deep old part, recognized the pattern of the terrain, the curve of the hills, the angles of the trees. She had been there once, or had she? A knock jolted her upright. She spun toward the stairwell, heart in her throat. The knock came again, measured, polite, unnatural. She climbed the stairs slowly. Cass. Whitlock stood at the door, water dripping from his jacket, his eyes bleary and bloodshot. He held a thermos in one hand, a recorder in the other. "You look like hell," he said. "You always this charming in the morning, only when I haven't slept." She let him in. He walked with slow, careful steps, like a man moving through a room that might change shape behind him. "You found something," he said, half question, half statement. She didn't answer. Instead, she spread the map on the reading table. Cass leaned over it. His eyebrows lifted. "This was Ellis's?" She nodded. His finger traced the bloodstain. "Looks like someone wanted this erased." "I don't think this was someone," she whispered. "I think it was something." He looked up. Maren told him everything. The dream, the antler, the stag-headed figure, the reflection that moved on its own. Her voice cracked only once, when describing Ellis's hollow face at the edge of the blood pool. When she finished, Cass didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a battered microcassette, slid it across the table. "I wasn't going to show you this," he said. "I found it in a sealed evidence box at the sheriff's station. Stamped 1995. No chain of custody. No name." Maren picked it up slowly. "Why show me now?" "Because it started whispering your name last night," she stiffened. "Through the tape." He nodded. Over and over. Same cadence. Same voice from the archive. Maren looked down at the map again. Her brother's scrawled handwriting. The deer path. The blood. She traced the symbol on the map. The 3 slashes and the dot. Something about it nagged at her like a whisper in the back of the mind. "What is this place?" she murmured. Cass hesitated. "Have you ever heard of a listening field?" "No." He leaned closer. "Certain patches of land are shaped in a way that bends sound. Natural acoustics. They echo weird, reverberate in spirals. Sometimes when you walk through them, your footsteps come back late or early. Sometimes you hear your own voice before you speak." Maren's mouth went dry. "And this one?" Cass nodded at the map. "This one's worse. I think that deer path runs right through one. I think your brother found it." And something hurt him. She didn't speak for a moment, then quietly, "We have to go there." Cass hesitated, then handed her the thermos. "You're going to want to stay warm." Maren tucked the map under her arm, and as she reached for the antler, still gone, she felt a strange emptiness. Not like something was missing, like something was watching through the place where the object used to be. Something waiting for her to remember. The forest behind Wake Hollow didn't wait for permission. It pressed in as soon as they stepped off the last paved road, swallowing Maren and Cass with a silence so complete it felt artificial, like the absence of sound had been engineered. No birdsong, no squirrels, no wind. Even the leaves underfoot gave muffled responses, like the earth didn't want to wake whatever slept beneath it. Cass carried his field recorder in one hand and a rusted machete in the other, swiping at vines that had crept across the old hunter trails. Maren held the stained map tight against her chest, checking it every few steps, scanning for the deer path Ellis had marked all those years ago. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but anticipation or dread. Maybe both. "We're close," she whispered. "This ridge here, see how it dips like a basin?" Cass nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "And that makes this the shoulder." "Right." She stepped forward, boots sinking into the soft mulch of decaying leaves and moss. Ellis's note said the deer path started at the base of this slope. Cass paused. "You think he came out here alone?" Maren didn't answer right away. "No," she said at last, "but I think he left alone." They descended the ridge in slow steps. The air grew damper, colder. The trees leaned tighter together, their trunks etched with faint scars, parallel grooves, some narrow, some wide, almost like claw marks but too clean. Maren reached out to one and ran her fingers along the indentations. "Not natural," she murmured. "These were carved." Cass leaned in. "Tools?" "No." Her voice was hollow. "Antlers." As they reached the bottom of the slope, the path narrowed into a strange, unnatural corridor, a winding strip of flattened soil running perfectly straight between twisted thickets. It looked like it had been walked 1,000 times by something that never changed its route. "There," Maren said. "That's it. The deer path." She could feel it before she stepped on it, like walking into the memory of a nightmare. A pressure behind the eyes, a ringing in the ears, a cold ache in the jaw, as if her teeth remembered biting down on something they shouldn't have. The moment her boot touched the path, the trees began to whisper. Not with words, just sound. The faint, distant rattle of branches clacking together, like dry bones. The shiver of hooves skittering across stone, far too rhythmic to be chance. Cass clicked his recorder on, and then, just beneath the surface of the forest's hum, came the sound of breathing. Ragged. Animal. Wet. "Do you hear that?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They moved slowly along the trail. Every 50 feet, another deer skull appeared, some half buried in moss, others perched in crooks of trees like sentinels. One had fresh blood pooled in its left eye socket. Though the forest hadn't seen rain or injury in days, Maren didn't stop. Something ahead called to her, not with a voice, but with memory. A magnetism behind the eyes. After 20 minutes, they reached a clearing. No birds flew overhead, no insects buzzed. At the center stood an enormous tree, dead, rotted, split open from the inside, as though something had pushed its way out long ago. Its limbs stretched like antlers, crooked and branched in too many directions. Beneath it lay a heap of animal bones. Cass crouched. "These are recent," he said. "Look." He picked up a deer jaw. The bone was pale, clean. But instead of teeth, there were tiny human molars embedded in the sockets. Cass dropped it. "What the hell is this?" he breathed. Maren stepped closer to the tree. She didn't know why, only that it felt right, that it recognized her. She reached the broken trunk and knelt, brushing aside leaves. Her fingers found metal. She pulled it free. A rusted hunting rifle coated in grime, trigger bent, barrel snapped near the end. A memory surfaced, like a bubble breaking water. Ellis's scream, the weight of metal in her hands. Her father's voice saying, "Don't ever tell anyone what you saw." She fell backward, breath caught. Cass ran to her. "What is it?" She couldn't speak. Instead, she pointed at the initials carved into the butt of the rifle, E.H. Ellis Holloway. Cass stood slowly. "He brought a rifle?" "Your brother." "No," she whispered. "He wasn't supposed to." She reached into her pocket, fingers grasping for the antler out of reflex. It wasn't there. But in its place, something sharp pricked her skin. She pulled out a shard of bone, not from her coat, from inside her skin, embedded beneath the surface. Like a splinter, her hand began to bleed. The blood dripped onto the old rifle stock. It hissed. Cass stepped back, eyes wide. "What the hell is going on, Maren?" She stared at the blood, the bone, the tree. And then she heard it. From deep in the woods, far past where the trail vanished into fog, a single clack, then another, like antlers tapping, and a voice behind it, not loud, not close, but inside her. "You never buried him." The sound of antlers grew louder. Cass grabbed her arm. "We need to go. Now." She didn't resist. They ran, stumbling through the deer path, branches tearing at their coats, the forest pressing in with every step. The path behind them seemed to close. The trail that had been clear minutes before now twisted, overgrown, wrong. Only when they broke through the ridge again and collapsed on the dirt road did Maren look back. The path was gone, vanished. The woods stood silent, but in the air hung a new sound, faint, layered, impossible, a child's voice humming, and beneath it, the echo of hooves scraping stone. Maren sat cross-legged in the middle of the library floor, drenched in sweat though the air was cold, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shield that wouldn't protect her from anything that mattered. Her right palm still throbbed from where the bone shard had forced its way out. The skin around the wound was blackening slightly, just under the surface, like rot was blooming inward instead of out. She hadn't told Cass about that part. He was upstairs, reviewing his field recordings, muttering into his mic with an edge of urgency. Every few minutes he'd pause and replay a section. His voice echoed faintly through the rafters, growing more agitated. Something about overlapping frequencies, about layered sounds that weren't there before. He kept saying it like he was trying to convince himself. Maren couldn't focus on him. Not now. Her hands were trembling too much to read, but she wasn't looking for words anyway. She'd pulled every book she could find related to local wildlife, old settler records, and obscure folklore, stacked them around her like a crooked fortress. She flipped through the brittle pages of a thin, leather-bound journal from the 1870s and stopped at a passage underlined twice in red pencil. They do not shed their horns like other beasts. They grow them from guilt, and they do not rot, even in fire. She stared at the phrase until it blurred. From the hallway came the sound of a page turning that wasn't hers. She turned toward the darkness. Nothing moved. No breath. No flicker. But the feeling returned. Like she was not alone in the building. As if something had been pulled toward her blood when it hit that old rifle. Drawn by scent. Or memory. Or ownership. She stood and gathered the journal, her flashlight, and the map from Ellis's drawer. If she stayed inside any longer, she'd lose the thread completely. She needed space, air, sky. She needed water. The lake sat at the outer edge of town, just past a narrow bridge the locals referred to as the Marrow Span. No one had explained the name. She hadn't asked. But now, crossing it in the fading light, she began to understand. The lake wasn't wide, but it was deep, unnaturally so. She remembered being told once as a child that it was an old collapsed lake, formed after something beneath the soil, caved in on itself. The trees around it leaned inward, as if mourning. The surface was unnaturally still. She walked the gravel path to the dock. The planks moaned beneath her weight. Water lapped softly against the sides, but there was no wind. Maren crouched at the edge, staring into the reflectionless surface. "I used to come here with him," she whispered aloud, unsure if she meant it or just wanted it to be true. Ellis. She reached into the shallows with one hand and felt a cold tingle against her skin. Smooth pebbles, bits of lake grass, silt, and then something hard, curved. She pulled it out slowly. Deer skull, hollowed and worn, but not natural, not discarded. Someone, or something, had carved into it. Not words, not language, just scratches, swirling symbols, runes that hurt to look at. The skull wasn't complete. The lower jaw was missing, but the antler bases were still attached, though the horns had broken off. As she turned it in her hands, the wind returned, but not from above. It came from inside the skull. A low whisper, like a breath released after. Centuries, then sound. The skull spoke, not with lips, not in voice, but through vibration in her hands. A humming, guttural tone that slid into recognizable cadence, a whisper that did not stop. She dropped it. The skull hit the dock with a thunk and rolled once before coming to a stop, facing her. Its sockets glared with silent accusation. And still, the whisper went on, inside her ears now, behind her bones. You were there. You saw it. You fed it. Maren staggered back, gripping her temples. The whisper split, doubled, reversed itself. One voice became two. Then four, a chorus, a choir of antlers. Each voice said a different thing. We bled beneath your name. The twin must remember. She broke the silence. You never left the hollow, she screamed, dropping to her knees. The whisper fell silent. Water lapped again. The dock creaked. Cass's voice called from the trail behind her. Maren? She didn't respond. He stepped into view, hair wind-blown, eyes wide. What the hell are you doing out here? She pointed at the skull. He approached slowly, crouched beside it. That's not normal. No, she whispered. It whispered to me. He nodded. So did my audio. He pulled his recorder from his coat and rewound it to a timestamp. Listen. He pressed play, a burst of static. Then, you took the wrong twin. Cass hit pause. Tell me you heard that. She nodded, trembling. He continued, another voice, deeper, animal. One wears the horns, one digs the grave. Silence. Cass looked at her, pale now. There's something I haven't told you, he said. But I think you need to see it. He handed her a manila envelope from his backpack. Inside, several photographs. One showed the town's original founding family, taken in 1893. 11 children, one mother, one father, 2 boys, identical, standing at the front, handwritten on the back, the H.H. brothers. Holloway? She whispered. Cass nodded. I think your family helped build this place, and I think every few generations, one of you ends up in the woods. She stared at the photo, the twins in it, one smiling, the other with antlers scratched faintly into the photo above his brow, like someone had drawn them after the picture was taken. Cass reached down and picked up the deer skull again, rotating it in the low light. There's something inside, he muttered. He turned it and shook out a small object, a tooth, human, baby tooth, cracked at the root. Maren stared. Cass handed it to her, and the second her fingers touched it, the lake rippled, not with wind, with something rising. They both turned, backing slowly toward the trees. In the distance across the surface, a shape breached, antlers, wide, bone-white, rising out of the water. Then a pair of shoulders hunched, covered in fur and moss, and then the water stilled again. The shape vanished. Cass dropped the recorder. We need to go, he said. Now. They didn't run. Running would make noise. Running would make it chase. So they backed into the trees, step by step, eyes on the lake, breath held. Only when they reached the marrow span again did the whispering fade. But the baby tooth in Maren's hand pulsed once, alive with memory, and somewhere behind them, under the dark mirror of the water, something began to hum again. Maren Holloway awoke to the smell of smoke. It wasn't heavy, not the thick, choking black that roared with fire and screamed danger. No, this smoke was soft, sweet, cloying. It curled under doors like an old secret and slipped between books, like breath, the kind of smoke that lulled you to stay asleep. She sat up in the loft bed, lungs hitching, nostrils stinging. Morning hadn't come yet. The light was too orange, too flickering. Something was wrong. Then came the distant crackle. A hiss, the sound of something, paper surrendering. Maren leapt from the bed and tore open the door. Downstairs, the library glowed like the inside of a dying lantern. The archive was on fire. Thick orange tongues licked at the stairwell, climbing toward the second floor, devouring the old settler files. The air snapped with burning twine and curling parchment. Wooden shelves collapsed in slow motion, crumbling beneath the weight of flames and history. Maren sprinted down the stairs, covering her mouth with her sleeve, ducking through smoke and embers. She didn't think. She didn't scream. She searched. The wool, blood-stained map, gone. Ellis's drawer, engulfed. The scorched cassette tape, still there. The flames had crept to its edge, but hadn't touched it. The black plastic casing sat amidst curling ashes like a buried artifact, untouched by heat. She grabbed it with a cloth, shoved it into her coat, and turned. The flames at the far end of the room burst upward, shrieking as if breathing in reverse. Shape moved behind the fire, tall, thin, human, but not. It stood inside the flame, antlers piercing the ceiling beams. Maren froze. The creature didn't walk. It tilted forward and sideways at once, joints bending like broken marionette strings. Its arms were too long, its eyes were hollow. Where its mouth should have been, there was only shadow, and from that shadow came a sound. Clack, 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 antlers striking bone. The creature lifted a hand and pointed. Not at her. At the books, at the history, at the memories. The message was clear. Burn it. Bury it. Forget it. Maren turned and ran. The smoke swallowed her as she sprinted through the stairwell, flames licking her heels. By the time she reached the upper floor, the roof above the archive had already begun to sag. She burst out the side, a door just as the west wing exploded in sparks behind her. The night outside was quiet, too quiet. No fire alarms, no sirens, no neighbors stirring. The town remained sealed in silence, as though it too had agreed to forget. Cass arrived 10 minutes later, headlights cutting through the smoke-hazed dawn. He slammed the car door, sprinted up the lawn, wild-eyed. Jesus Christ, what happened? It started on its own, Maren said. The archive's gone. All of it? Not all. She pulled the cassette from her coat and held it up like a relic. It didn't burn. Cass looked down at the tape, his mouth tight. That's not natural. No, she said. Neither is this. She opened her palm. The baby tooth from the deer skull was still there, but something had changed. Thin cracks now laced its surface like veins of lightning. A faint black mist curled from it as if it had been steeped in something unholy. It's rotting, she whispered. From the inside out. Cass stared. Then he looked back at the fire. Someone, or something, did this to cover tracks. Or remove witnesses, she said. A low voice rasped from behind them. Or to keep the hollow asleep. They turned. Aggie. Lawn. The old librarian stood in the road, backlit by smoke and dawnlight, wrapped in a tattered wool coat. Her face was thinner now, cheeks sunken, eyes milky with cataracts, but her posture was unnaturally straight. Maren blinked. Aggie? They said you were in the hospital after the smoke inhalation. I was. Her voice cracked dry like old wood. But it doesn't want me there anymore. What do you mean? Aggie shuffled closer. It's waking up, she said. And when it wakes, it burns the beds it was kept in, the archive, the maps, the trees. It's all memory, and memory is pain. Maren stepped forward. Did you know about Ellis? About the path? About the thing in the woods? Aggie's expression didn't change. I tried to forget. All of us did. That's the deal. We forget, it sleeps. We remember, it feeds. But what is it? The old woman shivered. A crown of guilt. A thing made from mourning that was never allowed to rot. Every time a child died, every time a twin vanished, every time someone buried the wrong truth, it grew horns. Cass swallowed. Then why were you helping me? Why let me in the archive? I didn't, Aggie whispered. You let yourself in. Cass's face fell. I was sure I locked. Aggie held up her hand. A single old key dangled from her fingers, blackened with soot. I burned my own copies last night. Figured you'd be the last. Maren stared at her. What happens now? Aggie smiled. A sad skeletal thing. You've stirred the hollow's roots. The thing with antlers is real now. It's taken shape again. And it remembers you. She turned to Maren. It always remembers you, Holloway. And with that, she walked into the fog. Cass started after her, but Maren stopped him. She's part of it now, she said. Whatever it is, whatever's coming, she's already inside. Cass looked back at the flames. The smoke had shifted direction, and in the black column rising from the library, a shape began to form. Antlers, wide, spiraled, dripping ash. A stag-shaped hole in the sky. Maren took a step back, and somewhere deep inside her coat pocket the cassette clicked. It had started to play again, and from it came a whisper. Where the child died, the hollow blooms. The cassette played long after the fire burned itself down. Maren sat in the passenger seat of Cass's car, door open, knees drawn to her chest. Smoke drifted from the blackened skeleton of the library. No flames now. Just columns of grey curling into a sky turned the colour of old teeth. The tape whirred softly in the handheld recorder on the dash, clicking and rewinding itself again and again, as if the message it carried wasn't done with them. Cass sat on the hood, headphones over one ear, pale hands gripping his notepad tight, enough to crumple it. His foot tapped nervously against the bumper. The recorder clicked again. Play, static. Then, one twin must carry it. One twin must dig. She wore the crown when he could not. The voice was male, cracked, familiar. Maren's heart slowed. That's my father, she whispered. Cass pulled the headphones off. You're sure? I'd know his voice anywhere. But he's dead. She nodded, mouth dry. Buried him 6 years ago, stroke. Then how is he on a tape from the 90s? Maren didn't answer, because she was remembering now. Not everything, but enough. The porch light flickering that night. The rifle left loaded near the door, her father's hands shaking, her mother crying into a dish rag, Ellis outside, alone, and the antler. Not just in a dream, but in her hand. She turned toward the ruins of the library. The smoke there had thinned, revealing more of the exposed substructure, charred beams, melted shelves. But something else now stood visible beneath what had once been the archive flooring, a door, iron, circular, with a rusted wheel lock in the center. Half of it was exposed by the collapsed flooring, the rest embedded in concrete that had cracked. From heat, Maren stepped toward it. Cass followed. Was that here before? He asked. No, or maybe yes, she thought. Maybe it had always been there, but only now remembered itself back into the world. Cass stepped around the frame. It's locked. Maren crouched beside it, reaching into the soot. Her fingers touched something cold, smooth, ancient, a brass plate. She brushed the ash away. Inscribed there, beneath layers of filth and time, Deepbury Vault. Familiar H. Cass leaned in. What's Deepbury? A mine, she said. Abandoned. Before the town was even named Wake Hollow. My father used to say the old settlers built the first chapel over the shaft to keep the ground still. I always thought it was just a story. But the initials, Familiar H. That's your family, Maren nodded. Her blood had gone cold. Help me turn it. The wheel lock was rusted tight. They struggled for several minutes, using a crowbar from Cass's trunk. The metal groaned, reluctant, but eventually it gave. With a sound like bone splitting, the vault door opened. A rush of air spilled upward, damp, sweet, full of rot and musk. Beneath it, a stone staircase spiraled. Into the dark, Cass turned on his flashlight. The beam struggled to penetrate the shadows. I don't like this, he muttered. You don't have to come. He gave her a look. You think I'm leaving you alone after what I've seen? They descended together. The walls were stone, and sweat-slicked, carved with thousands of names. Some familiar, some not, some scratched out, some rewritten over and over, deeper each time. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a chamber of roots, pine roots, blackened, fused, into the walls like veins pulsing with slow sap. The air was alive with the sound of breathing, not mechanical, not wind, living breath. The room vibrated with it. Maren stepped forward. In the center of the chamber sat a podium carved from bone-white wood. On it, a journal wrapped in black, leather and sealed with a strip of sinew. She didn't touch it. "Cass," she whispered, "start recording." He raised his mic. Maren slowly undid the sinew. Inside the journal, scrawled in her father's handwriting, Ellis was chosen, but he could not bear it. He wept, he bled, he begged. So she took it instead. So I lied. She flipped the page. The hollow doesn't feed on death. It feeds on remembrance. And my daughter remembers everything, whether she wants to or not. That's why it follows her. That's why it waits. Another page. The stag is no god. It is a debt, passed from one spine to another. And Maren's spine was straighter than Ellis's. She was strong, so I made her forget. Maren's eyes burned. She shut the journal. The floor beneath them groaned, not from weight, from movement. The walls began to breathe louder. Roots flexed. Somewhere beneath the stone, a low clatter echoed upward. Cass turned his light. Something moved at the edge of the room. Not a full form, just antlers shifting behind a veil of roots. The shape didn't step forward. It waited. Cass whispered, "Do you see it?" "Yes," she said. Then the whisper came again, from everywhere. "You wore the crown. You remember. So come claim what you carried." Maren stepped toward the shape. The roots parted slightly. Inside, curled into a fetal shape, lay a small, desiccated figure, Ellis. His body mummified, fused with root and soil, eyes gone. Antler points had pierced through his shoulders and sternum, holding him like pins in a specimen box. His mouth was open. Inside, a single object. Maren reached in and pulled it free. The splintered antler, whole now, clean. And when her hand touched it, every memory returned. The game in the woods, the dare, the gun in her hands, her father's scream, Ellis falling, bleeding, whispering, "It's not a deer, it just wears one," and the stag appearing, offering her a choice. Take the crown, or let her brother suffer longer. She had taken it, and then forgotten. Now she remembered. Tears burned down her cheeks. Cass's voice trembled. "What is it?" She turned toward him, antler in hand. "It's not a creature," she said. "It's a crown made of guilt." The walls pulsed harder. The roots surged. The antler glowed in her hand. Then behind them, Ellis spoke, not from his mouth, from the air, his voice, young and broken. "You brought it back." The tunnel began to collapse. Cass screamed, "Move!" They ran, climbing the spiraling stairs as stone cracked behind them. The vault door slammed shut the moment they emerged. Maren dropped to the earth, lungs burning. The sky had turned pale blue. The sun was rising. The library behind them was now just ash. But in her hand, the antler pulsed with life, and in her head, Ellis whispered one final thing. "It remembers because you do." Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. The church was empty. It wasn't Sunday, but that hadn't mattered in Wake Hollow for years. The faithful had thinned with each generation, like the deer paths that disappeared deeper into the woods, worn down until only ghosts remembered where to walk. But today, something was waiting inside. Maren and Cass pushed open the heavy oak doors of the old chapel on Ridge Street. Its stone walls stood crooked, moss-stained and damp with memory. Above the threshold, carved into the keystone, was a phrase Maren had never noticed before. Through silence, the forest speaks. Inside, the nave was dark. No candles burned, no organ echoed. The smell was thick, pine sap, old wax, and something else, sour fur. Cass's flashlight beam flicked on and swept the pews. Maren gasped. Every pew was filled, not with people, with deer skulls, dozens of them. Arranged like a congregation, each skull perfectly placed facing forward, their hollow sockets staring at the altar. Some were crowned with brittle twigs, others with broken glass, one with a child's pacifier looped around a horn. Antlers, tangled together like a forest grown wrong. She stepped down the aisle slowly, the wood groaning beneath her. The skulls didn't move, but the silence did. It changed, grew thicker. She felt it crawl inside her ears, behind her eyes. Then, from the altar, came the sound, a breath, deep, ragged, human. "Someone's here," Cass whispered, drawing his recorder from his coat. "I know." Maren's pulse beat like a drum in her palms. She climbed the altar steps slowly. The crucifix was gone. In its place, mounted on the wall with iron nails, was a set of antlers, wide and white and cracked through the center like lightning had struck them. Beneath the antlers sat an old man, thin, shivering, dressed in a preacher's coat that looked borrowed from the grave. His hands were clasped, his lips moving silently. His eyes rolled behind closed lids like he was dreaming something he didn't want to see again. Maren stepped forward. "Father." His mouth moved faster, still no sound. "Father Gresham?" She tried again, louder. He blinked suddenly, snapped, awake, but his eyes were wrong, too black, too deep, like looking through a well. His voice cracked like dry reeds. "You shouldn't have brought it here." Maren froze. "What?" "You carried the crown back to the threshold," he said, almost weeping. "It remembers the stone. It remembers the song." Cass stepped beside her. "What song?" The old priest began to hum. Low, unmelodic, like someone trying to mimic music without knowing what it meant. A throat sound made from grief. Then he whispered, "Every bone sings when buried in the hollow." Maren stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, slowly, as if pulled upward by invisible strings. His body began to shake, and then his mouth opened too wide. From inside it came a noise like antlers scraping on tile, a shriek of bone on stone. Maren stumbled, back. The skulls in the pews began to vibrate, not move, vibrate, as if humming. Cass swung his flashlight toward the altar and dropped it. The beam landed on the floor, on the shadow. The priest's shadow didn't match his body. His arms were down. The shadows were raised. The shadow's antlers were huge, curving toward the stained glass windows. The humming grew louder. Maren clutched the antler in her coat pocket. It burned now, not with heat but with weight. She turned to the priest. "What do I do?" He looked at her, eyes now filled with tears. "You remember, don't you?" He whispered. She nodded. "Then there's no saving you," he said, and with that, he collapsed to the floor. A gasp escaped his lungs, one final breath, and then silence returned. The hum stopped. All the skulls in the pews turned to face Maren. Not. Gradually, not slowly, all at once. Snapcass yanked her arm. "We need to go, now." They ran, burst through the church doors into the open air. The sun was up now, faint, weak, filtered through fog, but up. Maren dropped to her knees on the front steps, breathing hard. Cass stood over her, pale, eyes wild. "We're in something ancient," he said, "and it's waking through you." "I didn't want this," she whispered. He nodded. "But you're the one holding the crown." She pulled the antler from her coat. It was changing. Where once it was just a jagged bone, Now it was inscribed, faint etchings growing across its surface like veins. Runes, spirals, eyes, names. She ran her finger across one of the names, E.H. Her brother, Cass, leaned closer. "What is it?" "It's not a symbol," she said. "It's a ledger." Cass stepped back. "A what?" "A record of debt." She turned toward the church. Every window now glowed red, and from within, faintly, so faintly, the deer skulls sang. The forest no longer waited for nightfall. It breathed in daylight now, coiled in mist, stretched through the bones of trees, alive in the dirt like veins under skin. Wake Hollow's silence had grown restless. That morning, a storm had threatened. The hills but the clouds had passed without rain, leaving the woods hot and heavy with static. The scent of wet bark, ozone and distant rot clung to everything. Maren stood at the tree line just past Ridge Street, her coat pulled tight despite the heat. She held the antler in one hand, not out of fear, not as a weapon, but like it was tethering her to something, or someone. Cass stood beside her, map in hand, his face pale from the encounter in the church. He hadn't spoken since the bone. Choir sang. "The path we followed before," he said finally. "Ellis's deer trail. It loops. I traced it last night. It doesn't lead out." "What do you mean?" He flipped the map around and showed her the notations he'd made. "I walked it again after you slept. Used a GPS. The trail doubles back on itself. It forms a ring, a closed circle." Maren looked at the lines. "The hollow keeps what remembers," she said quietly. "So it traps the paths." Cass nodded. "But I think there's another one. Deeper. Past the ridge." He pointed to a faded mark on the original settler's map, a thin crevice between two bluffs, drawn faintly in red ink. "No one's marked this in over a century. I only saw it because it bled through the back of the map." Maren traced the path with her finger. The paper felt warm. "What's there?" "Locals called it the Dead Trail." Maren didn't flinch. "Let's go." The entrance to the dead trail wasn't obvious. It wasn't even visible until they were close enough for the air to shift. One moment they were walking along overgrown roots and ferns, and the next, a break. The trees opened like ribs, the light dimmed unnaturally, and the trail appeared narrow, straight, too straight. It ran like a scar through the land, sunken, slightly as if worn by something heavy and patient. Cass adjusted his backpack. "This is wrong." Maren stepped forward. "Everything is wrong." They walked in silence. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Their footsteps sounded muted, their breath too loud. Somewhere in the distance, a groan rippled through the trees, low and long, like something shifting in its grave. Maren's heart began to race. Then ahead, the trees parted again, and the clearing opened. It was a burial ground, but not for humans. Dozens, hundreds of deer carcasses lay in concentric circles, their bodies desiccated, twisted, antlers tangled together like roots. Some had fused with the earth, others looked fresh. None of them had eyes. Cass stared, mouth dry. "This is where they die." "Not just die," Maren whispered. "They're given." She stepped carefully into the circle. The bones didn't crunch. They shifted subtly, like they were aware of her steps. At the center stood a tree, short, gnarled, bleeding dark sap that glistened like oil. Maren approached it. Her head began to ring. Not pain, memory. She saw herself, aged 9, running, barefoot, screaming for Ellis. She saw the forest swallow him. She saw her hands sticky with blood and moss. She saw the stag, and it saw her. She reached out and touched the sap. It was warm, and beneath her hand, something shifted. The bark peeled away. A face, mummified, childlike, eyes gone, mouth sewn shut. Cass screamed. Maren staggered back. More bark split, more faces appeared, embedded in the wood. Children, dozens of them, mouths sealed with vines. One had teeth like hers, another had Ellis's chin. Cass backed away, nearly tripping over a carcass. This is wrong, Maren. This is a graveyard for memories. No, she said. It's worse. She knelt beside one of the fresher deer bodies and brushed its side. There, branded into the flesh, M.H., her initials. She fell back, breath punched from her lungs. Cass knelt beside her. What does it mean? She looked up, eyes glassy. These aren't just dead animals. They're vessels. For what? For us. The roots beneath the earth began to groan. Cass pulled her up. We're not safe here. She nodded. They turned. But the trail behind them was gone. The trees had shifted, closed. They were inside now. Cass raised his recorder. Something's coming. The device hissed, then screamed, not static. A child's voice. Dig, Maren. Dig where you left me. Maren spun. There, beneath the tree of faces, a spade. Old, rusted, half buried in roots. She walked to it, gripped the handle. It slid free like it had been waiting. She began to dig. The soil here was wet, black, sticky like tar. Every shovel of dirt made the voices louder. Closer, deeper. Cass didn't stop her. After 6 feet, the shovel hit. Something hard. Wood. A box. Small. She pried it loose, opened it. Inside, a strip of bloodied cloth. A cracked lens from a pair of glasses, and a second splintered antler, this one marked, carved deep with a name, Ellis. Maren fell to her knees. Cass touched her shoulder. What is this? She didn't answer, because from behind them something was rising, a sound like roots tearing free. The tree moaned, the faces blinked, and the clearing began to hum. Cass turned, flashlight trembling. His beam landed on something emerging from the far side of the clearing. A deer. No, not quite. Its body was animal, its legs too long. Its neck arched upward like a question mark. But its face was human, Maren's face. Cass screamed. The creature opened its mouth, and in her voice it whispered, "You took my place." They didn't run at first. They couldn't. Not because their legs refused. Maren's knees were already bent to spring. Cass's hand was trembling on the recorder, but because the thing that stood before them had stolen more than their voices. It had taken something deeper, the body's primal contract with fear, the part of the brain that knew when to flee. That instinct had been overwritten because the thing had her face, not a crude imitation, not a warped doppelganger. It was her, from the mouth to the crown, a perfect sculpt of skin and expression, carved into something that had no right wearing. It. The creature stood at the edge of the dead trail clearing. Its body was deer-like, too many joints, long limbs ending in narrow, splintered hooves that flexed when it stepped. Its spine arched unnaturally beneath stretched skin. The antlers grew from its back rather than its head, branching upward like parasitic limbs, twisting together into a cage of bone. Its mouth moved again, and in Maren's voice it whispered, "We bled from the same root." Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. Cass was the first to move. He grabbed Maren's wrist. "We have to go," he rasped. "Now." They didn't speak again as they retraced their steps, through the spiral of corpses, past the tree with sewn-shut faces. The forest didn't try to stop them this time. It let them go too easily, as if they were meant to bring something back. When they emerged from the trail into the grey half-light of Wake Hollow, Maren collapsed beside a tree, breathing hard, shaking. The box containing the second antler, the one marked Ellis, remained clenched in her arms. Cass didn't try to touch it. He just crouched beside her and asked, "Where now?" She looked up, pale, eyes rimmed red with old grief flaring into present terror. "There's a place," she whispered. "Off the East Road, behind the mill. We used to hide there, me and Ellis. A shed left over from the logging camps. It had mirrors on the inside, so we could watch ourselves play without being seen." Cass frowned. "That's a strange thing for kids to want." "We didn't want it." Her voice cracked. "It was already like that." The mirror shed still stood, barely. They found it at the edge of a clearing now overgrown with thistle and bramble, the old mill collapsing into the creek behind it. The shed was smaller than Maren remembered, just 10 feet wide, maybe 6 across, the roof sagging, walls cloaked in green-black ivy. But its door still hung from one hinge, groaning as Cass pushed it open. Inside, time had not passed. It had simply waited. The inner walls were covered in mirrors, all 4 sides. Some cracked, some fogged, some polished so brightly they reflected the dim afternoon light with unnatural clarity. They weren't uniform, different sizes, shapes, frames, as though someone had dragged them from different centuries and assembled them here on purpose. The floor was dirt, uneven, stirred recently. Maren stepped in slowly, carrying the antler box. The mirrors didn't show her reflection, at least not right away. Each surface flickered. Some showed the room as it was, others a different version. One showed her 9-year-old self standing frozen in a beam of light. Another showed a deer, limping, alone, dragging its shattered leg in a slow loop. Another showed Ellis, face down. Maren gasped and touched the glass. Her breath fogged it instantly. Cass stepped beside her, his flashlight's beam cutting across the opposite mirror. And there, reflected, Maren holding the gun. The memory wasn't hers. Not in full. Until now she was 9. The gun was too heavy. Her hands were slick with pine sap. Ellis stood 10 feet away laughing. The stag appeared behind him, just a silhouette. Antlers like shadow. And she fired. Not at the stag, at Ellis. Cass saw it too. He stepped back, eyes wide. "You killed him," he whispered. She nodded, tears on her lips. "But it wasn't just me," she said. "I didn't know what I saw. The thing, it made me believe he'd been taken, that I hadn't pulled the trigger, that I'd only screamed when he disappeared. My father, he found me, he saw the wound, and he let me forget." The mirrors behind her began to hum. Cass turned. The reflections flickered faster now. Each surface showed different versions of the same moment. Ellis dying, Ellis weeping, Ellis walking into the trees, Ellis staring back without eyes. The mirror directly in front of Maren turned black, then cracked. A line down the center. Maren opened the antler box. Inside, the Ellis antler pulsed faintly, like an animal's breath slowing. She reached for it, and the shed exploded with light. All the mirrors reflected a single image, the antler in her hand burning white. A wind screamed through the walls. The mirrors began to shatter one by one. Cass dropped to the floor, covering his head. Maren didn't move. She stared into the last mirror still intact, and in it, her reflection spoke without her. "One of you must stay. One of you must carry. One of you must dig." The mirror burst. Silence. Dust. Maren blinked. The shed had gone still. The antler in her hand no longer glowed. It had turned black, like obsidian, dead. Cass rose slowly. Did you see? Yes. Maren closed the box and stood. He's gone, she said. He gave it to me. I took it. And now? She didn't finish. Behind her, the broken mirror walls began to weep. Sap, thick, red, smelling like bone. Cass lifted the recorder. It didn't work. Static hissed from the speaker, then a voice, Ellis. She buried the memory in glass, but glass remembers. The crown is not given, it is chosen. Maren turned toward the woods. I have to go back, she said. Cass's voice was dry. To where? She looked at the horizon. The trees bent slightly in anticipation. To where I dug the first time. The sound never stopped. Even after they left the mirror shed, shards of memory clinging to their boots, the air thick with the iron scent of sap. It followed them. A resonance, not loud, not violent, just constant. Low, like a heartbeat somewhere. Too deep to trace. A thrum in the teeth. A reverberation beneath the town that made everything feel suspended, as if the hollow was holding its breath. Maren walked ahead of Cass, the obsidian-colored Ellis antler sealed in the wooden box, bound with a length of weathered twine they'd found behind the altar in the church. She kept it pressed against her chest like an offering, or a fuse. They returned to the library ruins in silence. Only now, in daylight, could Maren see how deeply the fire had scarred the archive wing. The structure had collapsed inward, leaving behind a half-collapsed tunnel of carbon and brick. What survived was barely a frame, smoke-stained walls and the skeletal outline of what used to be the heart of Wake Hollow's memory. But one thing remained: the listening room. A subterranean annex neither of them remembered being on the library blueprints, a place Aggie had only once referenced in a whisper long ago. The town once stored sermons there, words too sacred to be spoken aloud. They found the door beneath a mound of fallen timber and soot, a thick metal hatch, its face smeared with ash, one word carved above the handle: remember. Maren looked at Cass. He nodded once. They opened it. Inside, darkness, long, cold. Cass clicked on the flashlight and the beam cut through a corridor lined with recorders, old ones, reels, cassettes, VHS decks, wax cylinders, even dictaphones. The walls were littered with them, stacked without order, almost choking the space. Every few steps, one would hiss, then go quiet. The air vibrated. The smell of magnetized decay filled their lungs. Old sound curled into dust. They descended. No stairs, just a gradual slope, like falling forward forever. The hallway ended at a single iron door, barely cracked open. Something inside breathed. Cass paused. Do we go in? Maren said nothing. She pushed the door open. The room was vast, circular, with high concrete walls ringed by dozens of speakers, each connected by snaking wires to ancient recorders. In the center sat a table, and on that table, a cluster of objects: a broken compass, a child's shoe, muddy and torn, a pine cone split down the center, and Maren's old necklace, the one she'd lost the day Ellis disappeared. It wasn't possible, but it was there. She stepped into the room, and every speaker turned on at once. Sound exploded. It wasn't music, not speech. It was her memories. Ellis, don't run ahead. It's just a deer, Mare. No, it isn't. The voices layered over each other, distorting. One was her father. If anyone asks, he just disappeared. You didn't see anything. You didn't do anything. Another voice, unfamiliar, inhuman, slipped beneath. She took the crown. She buried the scream. Cass stepped into the room, jaw slack. These are all your memories? No, she whispered. They're the hollows. It recorded everything. She turned slowly, watching the speaker's pulse, the chords twitch, the sound bent in places, warped, overlapping different versions of the same events. One memory, Ellis alive, laughing, skipping rocks. Another, Ellis coughing blood. Another, Ellis dragged into the trees, screaming her name. She fell to her knees. The obsidian antler box thudded to the floor, and the moment it touched the concrete, silence. All the speakers died at once. The room held its breath. Then, one voice, clear, centered. One twin must carry the memory. The other must carry the debt. Maren stood. Cass turned to her. What does that mean? I was never supposed to forget, she whispered. That was the cost. I was the one who survived, so I was supposed to remember. Forever. But your father made you forget. And that's when the hollow began to wake. The table in the center shifted. Something pushed up from beneath it. A trapdoor she hadn't seen before. She moved to it, knelt, and lifted. Beneath, a reel-to-reel tape, sealed in a glass case, labeled with her mother's handwriting. Mare, do not play. Do not open. She took the case and set it on the floor. Cass crouched beside her. We have to play it. She looked at him, and for the first time in days she smiled. A sorrowful, crooked smile. I know. She opened the case. Inside, a note. You screamed for 3 days. We made you forget. But your body remembers. We couldn't bury it. We only buried him. I'm sorry. Maren slid the reel into the old player. She pressed play. At first, static. Then, her own voice, 9 years old, sobbing. He's in the ground! He's in the ground! He wouldn't stop moving! Then a scream, raw, real. Then silence. Then her father's voice, shaking. Bury the crown. Burn the memory. She's not ready. Then, the final voice. Ellis. If she forgets me, the forest will take shape. If she remembers, it will take her. The tape ended. Cass didn't speak. Maren picked up the obsidian antler. It had begun to crack. Tiny white fractures spidered across its surface. Cass reached for it. No, she said. It's mine. And when she touched it again, the room hummed. Not with playback, with invitation. Somewhere above, the wind shifted, and every speaker whispered in unison, come dig where you buried the crown. The ridge waited for her, not passively, like a hill or trail marked on a map, but actively, like a creature that had once been fed, and now remembered the shape of the hand that fed it. Its silhouette carved the edge of the sky east of town, a jagged curve of stone and pine that locals avoided even when the deer were calm. But this wasn't rut season anymore. Something else had begun. The hollow wasn't just remembering, it was rewriting. Cass parked the car at the end of a crumbling forestry road. The tires hissed on wet gravel, and the engine died with a sound like breath being sucked back into the soil. Neither of them spoke. The trail ahead was overgrown. Moss draped the branches like skin sloughing from old bones. Sap slicked the trunks, glistening like black honey. The wind had died completely. It was too quiet. Maren adjusted her coat, the box containing Ellis's blackened antler strapped tight beneath her arm. The second, smaller shard, the one from the deer skull, was now threaded on a length of string around her neck. It pulsed lightly, like a second heartbeat. Cass slung his recorder bag over his shoulder, his flashlight flickering despite a fresh set of batteries. You sure about this? He asked. No, she said. Then she started walking. The climb up Skinwalker Ridge took nearly an hour. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not because of fatigue, but because the ridge seemed to resist her. The slope fought her legs. The air thickened with altitude. Trees leaned inward, too symmetrical to be random, forming narrow corridors of shadow that echoed with faint clicks, like antlers tapping in warning. Halfway up, they found the first offering, a child's shoe, matted with dirt, its toe pointed toward the summit. Cass picked it up carefully. Maren shook her head. Leave it. They moved on. At the 3/4 mark, they passed a dead fawn hung from a pine branch by its own antlers. The flesh had been peeled, not torn, exposing muscle and vein without spilling blood. Its eyes had been replaced with small round stones. Cass said nothing. He only pressed record. By the time they reached the summit clearing, the sun had begun to collapse into twilight. The ridge leveled off into a broad, open plateau surrounded by crooked pines. At the center, the ground split slightly, like something beneath had once risen and then settled, and there, in the center, lay Ellis's backpack. Maren froze. It was exactly as she remembered it. Faded green canvas, one strap torn, the corner still scuffed from when he fell during their last game of hide and seek. Cass crouched beside it. "This isn't a replica," he said. "This has been here since then." Maren nodded. She knelt beside it and unzipped it slowly. Inside, a melted flashlight, a crushed juice box, a folded paper crown, and a single photograph. She pulled it out. It was a picture of her and Ellis, age 9, sitting beside a pine tree. She was holding something in her lap, a stick, a toy. No, the antler, already cracked, already stained. Behind them, in the shadows of the tree, was a figure, not fully visible, just a sliver, a suggestion. Antlers, fingers too long, and eyes that burned without light. Cass leaned closer. "That's not your dad." "No," she said. "It was already there." A low wind stirred the grass. Then came the first sound, a scrape. Stone on, bone, clack, clack, clack. The same rhythm from the tapes, the dreams, the clearing. From the edge of the ridge, something moved. Maren rose. The trees at the perimeter parted, not pushed by wind, but by will. The shape stepped forward, and this time...
It didn't wear her face, it wore Ellis's. Not the child he was, not the boy she buried.
But the man he might have become. His face was leaner, jaw stronger, hair longer, eyes empty. He wore the forest like a cloak, moss trailing behind him, bark fused to his skin. His chest was laced with vines, and from his back, 2 enormous antlers rose, arching like cathedral beams. "Ellis," she whispered. The creature smiled, not kindly. "You brought the crown." Its voice was his and not. Cass stepped forward. "This isn't real. This isn't your brother." The creature looked at him, tilted its head. "He's not wrong." It stepped closer. "I'm what she made me, what forgetting shaped me into." Maren clutched the box. "I buried the wrong thing," she said. The creature nodded. "You buried guilt, not memory, and the hollow fed on it." Cass pulled out the obsidian antler. "Is this what you want?" he asked. The creature laughed. "It was never for me. It was her crown. She took it before she understood." Maren stepped forward. "I remember now. Everything. The shot. The way you fell. The sound the trees made when they closed around you." The creature's eyes softened, just briefly. "Then you can end it." Maren looked at the ground where the soil had split. "Here," the creature nodded, "where the roots reached deepest." She stepped into the hollow. Kneeling, she placed both antlers, hers and Ellis's, into the dirt. Cass handed her the folded paper crown. She placed it atop them. Then she began to dig with her hands, fingers clawing into damp soil. No voice told her what to do. No wind spoke in riddles, only the rhythm of her own breath, the sting of her own memory. Deeper, deeper, until her fingers struck wood. She scraped it clean. A small box, identical to the one she carried, but older, rotting. She opened it. Inside, a third antler, twisted, golden, still wet, and branded with one word: Maren. She recoiled. Cass knelt beside her. "What is it?" She stared down. It was always me, she whispered. The forest was never trying to reclaim Ellis. It was waiting for me to finish the circle. The creature stepped forward. Now you know. One twin to remember. One twin to rot. Cass stood. Then destroy it, shatter it. Maren looked up. At the creature. At the crown. At the soil. She lifted the antler. It pulsed like a heart. And the hollow held its breath. The sky over Wake Hollow fractured at dawn. Not with light, not with birdsong, but with movement. A hush that slid through the treetops like something old stretching after sleep. The wind didn't blow so much as rearrange. Trees leaned the wrong way. Shadows puddled instead of lengthened. Maren stood at the summit of Skinwalker Ridge, hands still buried in the dirt where the third antler, her antler, had been unearthed. It now sat on the ground before her. Not obsidian like Ellis's, not brittle like the others. This one shimmered, faintly, gold threaded through bone. Its surface slick with a resin that smoked in the cold air. It pulsed with a slow, aching rhythm. Not a relic, a living thing. Cass circled it warily. "That's you," he said. "That's what the hollow kept." Maren didn't answer, because the ridge had begun to vibrate. The soil beneath her feet was trembling, not from an earthquake, not from thunder, but from the pounding of hooves. The deer had returned. She turned to the tree line just as the first of them emerged. Not one, dozens, silent, watching, standing in unnatural stillness. Bucks and does, with glassy eyes and antlers that twisted in shapes antlers were never meant to take. Serpentine curls, barbs, pronged into spirals like antennae, reaching toward some signal far beneath the earth. Blood still clung to some of their racks. One wore a human jawbone tangled in its tines. Cass took a step back. Jesus Christ! Then came the second wave. Deer, not of flesh, but of bark and bone. Wooden-limbed, sinew-laced, their bodies shaped from forest refuse and human remnants. Ribs formed from fence posts, eyes made of buttons and carved stones, teeth missing, yet they stared, they waited. Maren rose, and the forest exhaled. From between the unnatural herd stepped a shape, taller than all the rest, the stag that remembers, now fully formed, no longer half seen in mirrors or dreams. It stood almost 9 feet tall, body a patchwork of animal muscle and human history, faces stitched into its chest, half rotted, whispering. Its antlers grew from a crown of antlers, dozens interlocked, fused to a skeletal skull too long, too angular. Its eyes were mirrors, no iris, no pupil, just reflective hollows that showed Maren back to herself, over and over, fractured into infinite guilt. It stepped forward. The herd parted. Rut season has begun. The voice came not from the stag's mouth, but from within Maren, spoken in her own memory, repeated like a prayer carved into the inside of her bones. Cass fell to one knee, clutching his recorder as static erupted. From its speaker, blood trickled from his nose. "Maren!" he gasped. "It's using you, your voice, yourself, as a receiver. You're tuned to it." She didn't deny it, because the antler at her feet had started to float, only an inch above the ground, its golden tip dripping something that hissed when it touched the earth, forgetting. The physical residue of memory being unstitched, the stag spoke again. "One twin remembers, one twin bleeds, one twin must return to soil." Cass gripped Maren's wrist. "Don't listen to it. This thing doesn't care who you are. It just feeds on what you buried." "No," she whispered. "It feeds on what I wouldn't face." Her knees trembled. The antler pulled toward the stag, orbiting now like a tethered moon. She reached for it, and the world around her slowed. Time broke. Seen blink. She stood in the forest as a child, breathless, rifle too heavy in her hands. Ellis ahead, laughing. Blink. The stag emerged. Shadows. Breathing. Blink. She fires. Blood. Silence. Ellis's last look, not fear, but recognition, as if he knew she would, as if something else had whispered to him before she could act. Back on the ridge, the herd began to chant, not words, sound, bones clicking, hooves clattering, antlers striking together in rhythmic staccato. Clack, 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 a war drum of the forest. Cass stumbled back, his camera falling. "We have to stop it." Maren turned to him. "No," she said, "we have to let it finish." She stepped forward into the circle of deer. None moved. None attacked. They only turned, watching her, like witnesses. The stag lowered its head, antlers glinting in the dim light. The antler above the soil drifted into Maren's hands, and when she touched it, her veins lit gold. A scream erupted from her mouth. Not pain. Release. The sound of every memory she had forgotten being forced back into her skull all at once. Images. Ellis falling, Ellis rising, Ellis digging with her hands, the hollow where they played. The song they sang. One for roots, one for bone, one for the crown that must walk alone. The antler merged with her palm, not pierced, merged. It became a part of her hand, fused at the wrist, a protrusion of bone and gold. It didn't bleed, it grew. Cass screamed, "Maren, your arm!" She turned, her eyes glowed faintly. She walked toward the stag. "I remember," she said. "Every moment, every lie." The stag leaned forward. "Then we are the same." Maren smiled through the tears. "No." She raised the antler hand and pierced the stag's chest. The sound was like a tree snapping underwater. Roots screamed beneath them. The sky darkened. The stag didn't howl. It laughed as it crumbled to ash, and where it fell, flowers bloomed. Deer turned to stone. Cass wept. Maren fell to her knees, bloodless, bone-changed, and the antler crown, what little was left of it, melted into the soil like water on ash. From the wind came a whisper, "You wore it well." The hollow slept again, but only for a moment. The ridge was silent now, its sacred rot smouldering beneath the soil. The ashes of the stag scattered across the clearing, like the memory of a funeral no one agreed to attend. Maren knelt in the center of it, her breathing shallow, her hand still outstretched from the moment of the strike. The antler, her antler, was gone. Where it had fused to her flesh, only a white spiral scar remained, ringed in golden tissue that shimmered faintly beneath. Her skin like a vein filled with light. She touched it. Her fingers shook. Cass was crouched a few feet away, eyes wide, face pale and hollowed by what he'd seen. He hadn't spoken since the stag dissolved, not out of fear, out of disbelief, as if words might fracture the fragile peace that had descended. But Maren knew. It wasn't peace. It was pause. The forest was waiting. Cass finally broke the silence. "You killed it." She didn't look up. "I didn't kill it," she said. "I accepted it." He stared. "That thing, whatever it was memory," she said softly. "It was Ellis. It was me. It was everything we left buried too long." Cass walked to her slowly. "What do we do now?" Maren's eyes glistened. "We finish it." She stood, legs trembling, and walked back to where Ellis's backpack still lay, untouched at the edge of the ridge. She picked it up, opened the zipper with trembling hands, and removed the last object inside, a spiral-bound notebook, aged and warped by time. The front cover was smeared with dried sap and blood, but the name on it was clear, Ellis Holloway. She opened it. The pages inside weren't journal entries. They were drawings, dozens, hundreds. Childlike, yes, but precise in their intent. Each image was a variation of the same thing. Two children, twins, standing beside a tree with antlers for branches. In some drawings, one twin was smiling. In others, one was gone, vanished. But the last page was different. The tree stood alone, and from its base something grew, a crown. Cass leaned over her shoulder. He knew. Maren nodded. He knew what I would become. She touched the spiral scar again, and something clicked. A buried memory. Deeper than any she had uncovered before. She wasn't just the survivor. She wasn't just the one who forgot. She was the one who was meant to forget. And now she remembered what her father said that night, whispered while she lay in bed trembling, days after Ellis disappeared, before the funeral with the empty casket, before the first dream of antlers. Only one twin can carry the memory. One of you must be emptied. The other must root. She had thought it was a metaphor. Now she saw it clearly. Their birth wasn't an accident. The twins weren't just siblings. They were vessels. And when the hollow woke in them, when the stag crowned their family bloodline again, it demanded a sacrifice. One twin to hold the burden, one twin to bear the wound. And when their father realized Ellis wasn't strong enough to carry the memory, he chose her. Cass saw the shift in her face. What is it? Maren turned to him slowly. My father made the choice before I ever had one. What do you mean? She handed him the journal. He knew the hollow had returned. He saw it in us. When Ellis saw the creature in the woods that first time, it didn't chase him. It marked him, but he panicked. He tried to run. Cass opened the journal. So, your father made you the vessel instead. Maren nodded. He wiped me clean. Not just with lies, with ritual. She knelt in the soil again. He made me forget to protect me, but it didn't work. The trees groaned, the wind bent backward. The forest was listening again, and something in the soil pulsed just beneath her knees. Not dead, not dormant. Waiting. Cass held out the notebook. Maren, there's something here. She turned the last page. Taped inside was a photograph, one neither of them had seen before. Two infants in a hospital bassinet, matching blankets. Faces almost indistinguishable, but scrawled in ink across the corner, in her mother's handwriting, Maren plus Ellis. One, Crown Cass's voice caught. You weren't just twins. We were halves, she whispered. One to forget, one to remember. And then the truth struck. Hard, sickening, unforgivable. Her father hadn't buried Ellis at the old cemetery. He had buried him in the hollow, not just his body, but his memory. And to do that, he had buried part of her too. She had never been whole. That was the cost. Tears blurred her vision. Cass helped her up. We need to find the place, she said. Where he was buried. Truly buried. Cass nodded. Where? Maren looked toward the western tree line, and as if in answer, the wind parted the mist, revealing a familiar curve in the land. Not a ridge, not a trail, a grave. She began to walk. Cass followed, and behind them, for the first time since rut season began, the deer stirred, not to follow, to watch, because the twin who remembered was walking toward the truth, and the hollow was ready to claim its debt. The soil remembered everything, even the things Maren had forced it to forget. As she walked beyond the ridge with Cass at her side, the trees thinned, not from wind or erosion, but from some deeper thinning, a pulling away, like the forest itself, no longer wanted to bear witness. The land sloped downward in unnatural curves, soft underfoot, as if the ground wasn't made of earth at all, but layers of folded cloth or skin. Maren didn't need a compass. She didn't need Ellis's map. Her body knew the way now. She was returning to the place her father had led her, hand in hand, blood on her pajamas, face streaked with tears and sap, 21 years ago. The place they had never spoken of again. The place he made her forget. She was 7 paces ahead of Cass when she said it quietly, more to the trees than to him. He's under the blackroot tree. Cass stopped. Maren didn't. The blackroot tree stood like a monument in the clearing ahead, its bark charred as if struck by lightning, but alive, dripping with sap so dark it reflected no light. Its limbs reached downward instead of up, digging, like claws toward the earth. Moss grew along its trunk in a perfect spiral, and beneath it the dirt was sunken. Slightly, subtly, a grave never meant to be found. Cass approached beside her, breath fogging in the sudden cold. "This is it?" she nodded. "He made me help dig it." Cass looked at her. "Your father?" Maren didn't answer. Instead, she knelt. The dirt beneath her fingertips wasn't just soil. It was soft memory. She pulled off her gloves and began to dig. No spade, no ceremony. Her fingers sank into the ground like it had been waiting for her return. The roots parted easily. There was no resistance. The hollow wanted her to find it now. It was ready. Cass kept watch, jaw tight, eyes scanning the tree line. "Are you sure?" "I remember," she said flatly. "I remember the smell, the weight, his hand in mine when we lowered the box." She dug deeper. Sweat matted her hair to her temples despite the wind. Her arms were streaked with mud up to the elbows. Her palms bled in places, nails splitting. Still, she didn't stop, until her fingers struck wood. She gasped. The coffin wasn't much bigger than a trunk. A crude box. Uneven. Pine. Nails bent inward like they had been hammered by a child. Her child hands. Cass knelt beside her. "We don't have to open it." "Yes," she said, "we do." They pulled it free of the earth together, hoisting it to the surface. The tree above groaned. Sap spilled from its lowest branches like blood from a freshly opened vein. Maren pried the lid open. The hinges cracked, and inside, there was no body, just a bundle of skin and hair, twisted like a bird's nest. At its center, an antler, not broken, not splintered, whole, coiled like a root around itself. Cass reeled. "That's not possible." Maren stared down and whispered, "It wasn't a coffin, it was an incubator." The antler pulsed. The bundle of flesh twitched. Cass stumbled back, flashlight shaking. "What the hell is that?" Maren reached in and lifted the antler from the bundle. It uncoiled in her hands, still warm, still breathing, and etched along its length, in lines too fine to read until now. Every memory you refused to carry grew teeth. Maren dropped it. The ground shook. The tree above them screamed, not in sound, but in vibration. The roots buckled, and from beneath the loosened earth, something moved, a hand, small, punched upward through the soil, skeletal and soaked in sap. Then a second, and then Ellis. Not as a man, not as a boy, but as something born of both. His body was thin, twisted with bark, eyes sewn shut with vines. His ribs visible through stretched, greyed skin. One of his arms had fused with a root. His chest pulsed with a sickly light. He gasped and spoke. "You buried my voice." Maren fell backward. He stood fully, head tilted, neck cracking, sap running from his jaw. Cass reached for the recorder. It exploded in his hands. Ellis turned to him. "You aren't part of the story." Cass stumbled. "Ellis," Maren breathed. "I'm sorry." Ellis didn't blink. "I screamed for you for days, but you forgot me. You made me the wound. You left the hollow to rot alone." "I didn't know," she said. "They made me forget. But you remembered enough to come back." The antler on the ground twitched again. It rose, on its own, floated between them. "One of us must carry this." Cass shouted, "Don't touch it, Maren!" But she was already reaching. Ellis stepped forward, and from his chest, another antler began to push through the skin. Golden, cracked, mirror to hers. Maren stopped. Their eyes locked, and in that moment she realized he hadn't died. Not fully. The hollow had taken him. Yes, but because she gave him to it. Ellis had become the debt she refused to pay. And now, they both had crowns. Maren whispered, "You're the wound." Ellis replied, "You're the scar." From behind them, the tree split open. A scream rose. From the forest floor, the stag that remembers was not gone. It had simply changed hosts, and now it had two. The black-root tree bled until the ground beneath it became a shallow pool of sap. It shimmered like oil, reflected no light, and moved even when the wind didn't. As the bark split open and the scream rose from beneath the roots, Maren realized they had never been walking toward the end of something. They had been walking toward its mouth. Ellis stood inches from her, no longer the brother she remembered. He was something older now, not ancient in years, but in meaning. His body a graft of flesh and memory, bound together by time and neglect, held upright by will and wrath alone. The golden antler had pushed further from his chest, grown into a sharp curve that cracked open the skin around his collarbone like a sprouting limb. Blood and sap dripped from it, indistinguishable. Maren backed away, but not far. Cass was behind her, crouched beside the ruined box that once held the coiled antler, his breath shallow, one hand clutching his side where the recorder explosion had seared his ribs. He looked up with fevered eyes, mouth trembling. "What is he?" Maren's voice barely found breath. "Me, but left behind." Ellis took a step forward. His sewn-shut eyes bled lightly. The vines, threading through his lids, quivered with each breath. "The hollow made me remember everything. Every second of pain. Every heartbeat you were allowed to forget." He didn't speak with accusation. He spoke with purpose, as if explaining terms to someone who had signed a contract without reading it. Maren's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for that. I didn't know." "You did," he whispered. "Somewhere, beneath the forgetting, you always knew." He raised one hand. The antler that had hovered between them, still floating, humming with heat and memory, trembled. "It wants to go home." She stepped forward. The air between them thickened, not with mist, but with sound. The distant clack of antlers, the rhythmic stamping of unseen hooves. The hollow was speaking through rhythm now, no words, just bone memory and heartbeat logic. Cass stood, weak, wavering. "Maren, don't." She turned. Her voice was hollow. "If I don't take it, it finds someone else. You, the town, the kids after us." She turned back to Ellis. "But if I do..." He tilted his head, the vines on his face curling like dried leaves. "You finish what they started. You carry the full crown. No more half-remembrance, no more denial. You become the hollow's mouth." A sudden silence fell across the clearing. Every tree stopped groaning, every root stilled. Even the sap froze. The forest was holding its breath. Maren stepped forward, reached for the floating antler, and stopped. She looked at Ellis. "There's a third way." "There's never a third way in Wake Hollow," he said. "Only burial, or bloom." Maren reached into her coat and pulled out the spiral-bound notebook, Ellis's drawings. She held it out. "You gave me this." His head twitched. His sewn eyes fluttered beneath the vines. "I didn't give it. They buried it with me. You wanted me to find it," she said. "Part of you, before you changed, before the hollow used your wound to root itself deeper." He didn't answer. She flipped to the final page again, the crown growing from the earth. Cass's voice broke through behind her. Maren, you said it yourself. The hollow doesn't just feed on memory, it feeds on choice. She blinked, then looked down at the coiled antler still hovering in the space between them. Choice. That's what it always came back to. When she pulled the trigger. When her father erased her memories. When she decided to return, all of it fed the hollow because choice creates roots. Maren clenched her jaw, then did something no one expected. She reached down, grabbed the antler, and snapped it in half. The moment it cracked, the air screamed. Not with sound, with reversal. Wind pulled backward, trees folded inward. The blood pooled beneath the blackroot tree hissed and turned to vapor. The sky fractured, not into light but static, a grey, trembling film that shimmered like an old television screen stuck between channels. Ellis screamed. The vines around his face writhed. He fell to his knees, clutching the golden antler that had grown from his chest as it began to splinter, fracture, fall apart in flakes of burning memory. You don't get to break it. You were supposed to wear it. Maren knelt beside him, gripping his wrist, eyes full of tears. Did, she said. I wore it my whole life. You just couldn't see it. He sobbed once, then choked, then, like a puppet whose strings had been quietly cut, collapsed. Cass limped toward her. Is he? She shook her head. No, not dead, not gone. He's going back. To where? To where I left him. Behind. Them. The blackroot tree shivered and then began to wither. Its roots coiled back into the earth. The spiral moss burned away. Its trunk twisted until it resembled nothing more than a fallen log. Ellis's body, flesh, bark, and sorrow, slid into the earth without a sound. No grave, no scream. Only a long, final breath. Maren stood. The halves of the antler still glowed, faintly in her hand. She turned to Cass and held one out. You keep one. Why? So someone else remembers this. And the other? She tucked it into her coat. I'll plant it. Cass looked down at the fragment in his palm. It burned cold, and from somewhere deep in the hollow, the voice of the forest whispered, one root ends, another begins. Night returned too quickly. Maren and Cass had barely left the site of the blackroot tree, now just a collapsed husk of bark and memory, when the light began to collapse behind the hills. Not a sunset, not a dusk, just absence, like someone had drawn the blinds of the world shut. The air went cold, the animals stilled. The hollow, once sluggish with sleep, began to stir with something new. Maren felt it first, a pressure in the jaw, in the ribs, as if her lungs had started to breathe, for something else, not her own survival. But as a host, Cass noticed the change in her posture. Her shoulders had dropped, her spine too straight, eyes scanning the trees in intervals that felt not random. Are you okay? He asked, not for the first time. She didn't answer at first. Then quietly, I broke the crown. He nodded, and the hollow didn't like that. No, it didn't. Because the hollow had never wanted obedience. It wanted debt, and Maren had paid it in the wrong currency. They reached the edge of the forest clearing where the ridge bled into a slope, and beyond it, the outskirts of town. A single lamppost buzzed above a rusted bench, where vines had begun to coil around the base like fingers reaching for memory. Maren stopped beneath the light. Cass spoke behind her, voice tight. You're bleeding. She looked down. Her coat was stained. Not red, not gold, black sap, dripping from her collarbone, from beneath the spiral scar where the golden antler had once fused. Cass stepped forward, but she lifted a hand to stop him. It's not mine, she said. It's memory, leaking. He pulled the antler fragment from his pocket. It had begun to hum, vibrating against his fingers. Maren turned toward the town and froze, because something stood in the middle of the road. A man, or the shape of one, but taller, thinner, wrapped in cloth that looked sewn from deer hide and human hair. His face was wrong, smooth, featureless, save for a mouth that smiled too far, curling upward toward where eyes should have been. He didn't move, didn't breathe, but Maren knew him. So did the hollow inside her. Cass whispered, "Who is that?" She exhaled, "My father." The creature took one step forward. His voice, when it came, was both hers and Ellis's, layered with the sound of the woods in rut. "You buried me in 2 places, but I only needed 1. Another step. You broke the crown, but you forgot the face." Maren took a step back. The hollow was wearing her father, not as a disguise, as a trophy. He had made the first offering. He had sown the first forgetting. And now, as the legacy shattered, the hollow emerged not as memory, but man. Cass raised the antler fragment like a blade. The figure stopped, and then smiled wider. "You've carried the debt, but not the weight." The mouth widened further, impossibly wide, splitting to reveal a ring of teeth made from carved antler tips. "So now, Maren Holloway, you must become what was promised." Cass shouted, "Run!" But Maren didn't move. She stepped forward. "I won't wear the crown." The hollow tilted its head. "Then wear the face." The trees behind it cracked. Every window in Wake Hollow shattered at once. Sirens started, then died. Streetlights flickered and went dark. Cass turned in a circle. "It's coming through the whole town." Then came the hooves, dozens, hundreds. The eye, herd had returned, not as deer, not as ghosts, but as reflections. Shadows pulled from memory, people, antlered and bloodless, familiar and forgotten. The town of Wake Hollow had become its own mirror, and now it reflected every sin Maren had tried to bury. She turned to Cass. "You need to go." "No. No way. If you stay," she said, "you become part of it." He hesitated. Then she did something she hadn't done since they met. She smiled. "Take the antler," she said. "Plant it somewhere else, where no one will know what it is." He shook his head. "Maren." But the hollow was moving now. Her father's face opened fully, the jaw splitting like rotten bark. From it came the sound of her scream, age 9, echoing backward through time. The herd reached the edge of the trees. Cass backed away. "I'll wait," he said, "as long as it takes." "No," she said softly. "You won't remember me." She walked toward the hollow. It welcomed her, and in that final moment before she disappeared into the mouth of the thing that had grown through her entire life, she whispered something only the woods heard. "I am the crown. I am the root. I am the forgetting. I am the fruit." Then she vanished into the hollow's shape. The sky turned red, then black, and then silence. The wind stopped. The town stilled. And Cass stood alone on the roadside, holding a fragment of an antler, his eyes full of tears, his heart full of something he couldn't name. And somewhere behind him, Maren's voice echoed faintly through the woods. "The hollow wears a face because someone let it." Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Wake Hollow never made the news. The night Maren disappeared into the hollow's mouth, when the sky split open like wet paper and the trees sang in a voice no human throat could mimic. There were no sirens, no helicopters, no rescue crews, only a soft, widespread forgetting. By morning, the town was silent. Not abandoned, not ruined, just altered. Cass Whitlock stood on the same sidewalk where he'd watched Maren vanish 3 days earlier. The sky above him was overcast, but in a way that felt deliberate, like it was waiting for the next page in a story it no longer believed in. Behind him, the audio recorder dangled from his belt, its batteries long dead. He hadn't replaced them. Not since the last transmission. Not since the whisper came through. The town has closed its eyes. And it had. Every single window in Wake Hollow was gone. Not shattered. Not boarded. Simply absent. As if the buildings had grown skin over. Them. Every house had smooth siding where glass should have been. Shops had sealed displays. Even windshields on parked cars appeared fogged from the inside, solidified, like frozen breath held in permanent exhale. Cass ran a hand over one of them. No give, no texture. Cold. He turned slowly, noting the same in every direction. The church, the bakery, the little schoolhouse. The town had become sightless, as if it no longer wanted to see itself, and maybe it didn't, because what it would see, if it looked back, was her. Cass could still feel Maren in the ground beneath him, in the trees, in the pressure behind his own breath. Something of her had not been consumed, not entirely. She had made a choice, one that the Hollow hadn't expected. He clutched the antler fragment in his coat pocket, burned black now, edges worn smooth like something ancient. He still didn't know why she gave it to him, only that he hadn't let it go since. He reached the library ruins, or what used to be the ruins, because now it was whole again, fully rebuilt. No soot, no burn marks. The doors had been rehung, the roof retiled, but the strange thing was no one remembered rebuilding it. Not even the townsfolk, what few remained. Cass had asked. The old butcher across the street shrugged. Been that way for years, hasn't it? But Cass knew better. He stepped through the door. The interior was dim, untouched by dust. The shelves were full again. The archive room, sealed with iron bars now. He walked toward the circulation desk and found something. Waiting there, a cassette tape, unlabeled, and beneath it, a note in black ink, for Cass, please remember. He picked it up, heart pounding. The cassette was warm. He took it to the playback booth upstairs, one of the few machines still operational. Slid it in, pressed play. At first, silence, then the sound of footsteps, crunching leaves, breathing, then Maren's voice, not recorded in fear, not screaming, just calm. If you're hearing this, then the Hollow let me leave something behind. Not all of me, but enough. Cass leaned, in tears stinging. You need to know it doesn't feed on blood or pain. It feeds on patterns. It feeds on echoes. It finds places where memory repeats, and it makes homes out of grief. A pause. Then, I wore the crown. I burned the map. I broke the antler. But the Hollow isn't gone. It's only changed shapes. Because that's what it does. It learns from us. Cass looked toward the sealed archive. You can't stop it, Cass, but you can confuse it. You can interrupt the rhythm. Tell stories that end differently. Refuse the roles it gives you. Another pause, and then softer. If it comes again, don't run. Tell it a new ending. The tape clicked. Cass sat in the silence for a long time. Below, the town breathed slow and blind. But in his hand, the antler fragment began to warm again. And outside, in the trees beyond the ridge, the deer were watching. They had no eyes, but they remembered, and now, so did he. Cass didn't sleep the night after the tape played. He sat on the library roof, cross-legged, shivering despite the layers, the antler fragment resting in his palm like an ember that refused to go out. The Hollow had grown quiet again, yes, but it was not dormant. Just watching, listening, testing the seams of the town's memory like a finger running along an old scar. Below him, Wake Hollow breathed in shallow rhythm. No one walked the streets. The town had taken on the stillness of an old photograph, slightly wrong in proportion, like a detail had been misprinted. The fog came at the same hour each night, cloaking everything in soft erasure. And when it lifted at dawn, there were fewer birds, fewer dogs barking, more deer, always watching from behind fences, at the edge of parks. From inside garages, some with antlers, some with faces. Cass knew what this meant. The hollow wasn't gone. It had only grown subtle, smarter, and Maren's sacrifice, if it was a sacrifice, had not ended the pattern. It had just changed the melody. He looked down at the antler in his palm. It pulsed faintly, warmth rising up through the lines of his hand into his forearm, like sap returning to a winter branch. Every time he closed his fist around it, he remembered more. Not just what happened, but what wasn't allowed to happen. The alternate versions of events the hollow had buried in the dirt, Ellis surviving. Maren refusing to dig. Cass never arriving in Wake Hollow at all. They were echoes, trapped like gas in the rings of a tree. He needed to follow them, not to stop the hollow, but to outgrow it. He stood, climbed down the side ladder of the library, and made his way through the empty streets toward the only place left untouched since the final night. The chapel. Not the rebuilt church with its clean steeple and newly poured steps. The old one. The original wooden frame collapsed decades ago, half swallowed by bramble and ivy, buried behind the town cemetery like a sin politely hidden behind a curtain. He had passed it before, but never entered, until now. The fog followed him. Or led him. It was hard to tell anymore. The chapel door had no lock. He stepped inside. The floor groaned, but not from rot, from recognition. The altar was still intact. Behind it, the bones of the crucifix still clung to the wall, though the crossbeam had been replaced sometime long ago with antlers. He didn't flinch. Instead, he walked slowly to the altar and removed his recorder. He pressed record. "This is Cass Whitlock," he said. "Archivist, witness, last known recipient of the Hollow's memory. I'm leaving this here because I think something is about to return." He opened his notebook, flipped past the notes, past the sketches, past the transcripts, to a blank page, and began to draw. Not words, not symbols, but rings, concentric circles, like tree rings or antler rings. Each ring had a date, each a variation of the same moment, different choices, different outcomes. He began to connect them. A map, a route system. Maren had said it in the tape. The hollow doesn't end, but it can be confused. So he would confuse it, by drawing its echoes, by remembering every version, by refusing to forget. When he was done, he folded the page into a tight spiral and placed it beneath the altar. Beside it, he left the antler fragment and a whisper, "Grow somewhere new." The wind answered, not in sound, in feeling. A hush swept through the chapel, deep and round. The kind of quiet that felt alive, pregnant. The kind of quiet that always comes before a new voice learns to speak. He turned to leave. But in the doorway, a shape stood, small, childlike. He couldn't see a face, but it held something. In one hand, a paper crown. In the other, a cassette. Cass reached for the recorder on his belt, but the batteries had died again. He looked back up. The shape was gone. The tape rested on the altar now, labeled in looping script. Route Maren. Echo. Cass stepped forward, heart pounding, tears forming. He picked up the tape, and this time, he didn't play it. He listened to it, and from inside it came Maren's voice, soft, young. You found me, so I get to grow again. The chapel didn't echo when Cass closed the door behind him, even though the wind pushed against the frame, even though the fog whispered through the cracked floorboards and vine-slick rafters, even though his own boots hit the warped wooden floor. With weight, no echo followed. That silence wasn't natural. It was curated, designed. The kind of silence you only find in a place where too many things were once spoken, and now something refuses to let any word return. Cass stood alone in the nave with the new cassette, Root Maren, Echo 1, clutched tightly in his hand. The label was handwritten, delicate, curling like sap veins in bark. Familiar, not childlike. Evolved. A voice not buried but growing somewhere new. He hadn't brought a player. The one in his library booth had shorted out 2 days ago when the air began humming near the windows, or where windows used to be. But the tape didn't need a machine anymore. It vibrated in his hand. Faintly. A pulse. He pressed it to his ear. And she spoke. Not a recording. A presence. The hollow has no end. Just boundaries it hasn't yet learned to cross. But you, Cass, you're the line. His breath caught. You stood at the edge. You didn't run. You remembered even when it hurt. That makes you dangerous. The chapel shivered. Cass lowered the tape. All around him the vines began to wither, just slightly, just enough to notice. Something in the walls twitched, a pulling inward. Like the building exhaled, startled, he raised the tape again. I'm not trapped, Cass. I was changed. This is what the hollow never understood. That rot can become soil. That memory isn't just pain. It's a seed, a pause. And I planted it in you. Cass stumbled back, nearly dropping the cassette. Jesus, Maren. Her voice returned, clearer now, louder, not from the tape, but from under his skin. No more tapes, no more deer. It's learning new shapes now. But so am I. He looked down at his arm. The veins beneath his skin pulsed gold, just once, faintly. A slow, burning ring, like tree bark spiraling beneath the flesh. Cass dropped the tape onto the altar. It didn't bounce. It sank into the wood, as if the altar remembered it, as if it had always been there, waiting to be found. The room dimmed, and from the rafters came a sound. Clack, just once, but not antlers, fingernails. Then a second sound, fainter, the scraping of something wooden against concrete, far below. Cass turned. Behind the altar, the old floor hatch, the trapdoor to the chapel's crypt, was open. He hadn't touched it, hadn't even noticed it before. He took one step closer. Maren's voice whispered again, from the space below. They used to bury their faith here, the ones who tried to outlive the hollow. They left prayers in jars, teeth in velvet, names scratched into tin, but none of it lasted. Because they never accepted what we are. He stood above the hatch. Faint warmth radiated upward, and a second voice now joined hers, Ellis. But not the Ellis he'd seen on Skinwalker Ridge, not the stag-wound, bark-skinned vessel of the hollow's debt. This was younger, lighter, clear. Maren made the first choice. But you'll have to make the last. Cass knelt, peered down into the crypt, and saw not stone, but roots, massive, golden-threaded roots spiraling downward into the dark. Each one glowed with symbols burned into the bark. Cass, Echo 2, Ellis, Wound-bearer, Maren, Crown broken. There were hundreds more, some with names he didn't recognize, some with names he knew, and one that hadn't yet been carved, but pulsed with light anyway. His, Cass Whitlock, witness, uncarved. The voice returned. Maren again, fainter now, but steady. If you descend, you plant it. You accept that remembering is not just recording. It's growing something new from something old. But once you do, there's no forgetting again. Cass stared into the hollow. His hollow. Not one of deer, but of tapes, of truth, of choice. The town didn't need a crown anymore. It needed a gardener. He stepped onto the first root. The wood held him. Marin's voice smiled. Good. Now begin the second. Echo. Cass Whitlock descended into the hollow. He did not fall. He did not crawl. He walked downward along the spiral of roots, each one thick as a bridge, golden-veined and pulsing faintly beneath his boots. The air was warm, not stifling, but womb-like. The walls glistened, not with water, but with sap, old and slow, seeping from veins in the bark. Each drop carried a glint of memory, refracting images as it dripped, children laughing, antlers crossing, a gunshot in the woods. He kept going. He couldn't not. Above him, Wake Hollow had vanished. No more sky, no town, no fog. Only the echoes of every story the forest had once tried to silence, and now played back like a never-ending tape. His hand still gripped the notebook, but it had changed since the chapel. The ink inside had bled into the margins, stretching outward like roots, turning each page into something more organic, alive. The names no longer stayed in place. They moved, shifted, rearranged. Marin, Ellis, Aggie, Father Gresham, Holloway, Whitlock. Some scratched out, others still writing themselves. He stopped when the spiral ended. Not in a cavern, not in a grave, in a room of mirrors. But unlike the mirror shed, these were not reflective glass. They were standing bodies fused to bark, lined along the walls, grown into the wood, each figure unmoving, mouth agape, eyes sealed with pitch, hands holding antlers like offerings, some full, some shattered, some still growing. He stepped closer to one, a woman, pale, mouth frozen, mid-scream, Marin's mother, and the mirror beside her, Father Holloway, then Ellis, again, younger, in sleep. En route, Cass turned in a slow circle. He was standing in the root vault, where the hollow stored its echoes when they no longer needed to be played. Marin's voice echoed faintly in the walls. Memory is not for keeping, Cass. It's for planting. He saw it now. The roots weren't just keeping stories. They were trying to grow a new one free of the loop, one that ends differently. Cass knelt in the center of the chamber. The floor was soft, soil and waiting. He pulled the final page from his notebook, the one he had never written on. The one with his name glowing at the center, Cass Whitlock, witness. He tore it free and began to dig, not deep, just enough. He placed the page into the soil. Then, slowly from his coat, he removed the final fragment of antler, Marin's parting, gift, and broke it again into dust, scattered it across the page and spoke, "Let what grows remember." The soil pulsed. A root split open beside him. Inside it, something new, a sprout, tiny, pale, antler-shaped, but soft, not bone, not weapon, seed, and from the vault every body exhaled, once, together. The wind did not blow. It rose from below, upward, through the vault, through the spiral, through the chapel, and across the town. At that exact moment, Wake Hollow changed again. Windows returned, one by one, each pane of glass refracting different scenes. Not the present, not the past, but possibilities. Window at the butcher shop showed Ellis at 17, helping his sister shelve books. A window at the school showed Marin teaching a group of children how to track deer barefoot in moss. A window in the church showed Father Gresham praying, not to forget, but to remember honestly. None of these things had happened, but now they could. because the hollow had been interrupted, not defeated, redesigned. Back underground, Cass lay on his back, the soil warm beneath him. His hands were covered in root ink. The notebook was gone, the antler gone. But in his chest, something had started to grow, not physically, narratively. He was not the witness anymore. He was the gardener. And from the darkness, Marin's voice whispered for the final time. Thank you for breaking the loop. Now, let it grow wild. Cass closed his eyes. The soil hummed, and the hollow turned inward, not to sleep, to germinate. Wake Hollow never had a beginning. Not really. It wasn't founded. It was remembered into existence. Rooted into a shape that memory could live in, a place that echoed long enough for someone to confuse the echo for truth. And that truth, for generations, had been shaped like horns. But something changed. Someone changed it. And now, for the first time in the town's history, the deer are gone. No more silhouettes on the road at dusk. No more bones at the tree line. No more hoof prints. In places no animal should reach. Instead, there are gardens, overgrown and wild, blooming from unlikely places. A crown of sunflowers sprouting from the cemetery gate. A spiral of moss spreading up the bell tower. Vines climbing through the shutters of Aggie Lawn's old home, coiling into the shape of a sleeping stag. People don't talk about it, not directly, but they feel it, the change, the softness in the soil. The way air hums around corners now, like something watching, but not waiting, just listening. The windows have returned. They don't reflect what's in front of them. They show what could have been, and sometimes what still might be. Inside, the rebuilt library, the archive room, no longer has a vault. Instead, there's a nursery. Shelves lined not with cassettes or transcripts, but with small pots of saplings. Some shaped like antlers, some like fingers, some still finding their own design. On the center table, sealed in glass, a torn notebook page titled Echo Map, a photograph of two twins by a tree, and a shard of bone so old and worn, it barely resembles an antler anymore. Children gather around it during the summer programs. They trace the glass. They listen to the humming floorboards. Sometimes, if they press their ear to the wood, they hear a woman's voice. It's not a curse. It's just an old seed. And the children smile, because they understand what the grown-ups don't. The hollow isn't scary anymore. It's strange, sacred, wild. And deep in the forest, where no path was ever marked, where the dead trail once curved into nothingness, there now grows a tree. Not blackroot, not twisted, just tall, straight, antler-shaped branches reaching upward. Its bark hums when the wind touches it, and at its base, barely visible in the moss, a spiral scar, a handprint, and a single engraving. Marin Holloway. Memory made flesh, we bury what we carry. We bloom what we forgive. Below it, a sprout pushes from the earth, fresh, pale green, delicate, new. A child, one of the locals, places a paper crown on the sprout, and for a moment, the wind bends low and slow, like a whisper. Let this echo be the last one. Then the forest quiets, and somewhere far beneath, the final tape stops recording, forever.